soon? Casey asked. Yes, sweetie, we're stopping at the next exit for food and gas. Almost in Phoenix. Do you need the restroom? Daddy, I'm not a baby. No, I don't need to go, but I'm starving. All right, we'll stop soon. Zane smiled, turning off the exit, signaling to Brad behind him. They passed a few fast food places without enough parking and headed to a cafe Zane knew where they parked their trucks. Zane helped his daughter Casey out of the truck, spinning her around as she giggled. She ran off to find her friends Stacy and Sammy, who greeted her with hugs and complaints about hunger. Carol, their mom, reminded them they had just eaten at the carnival and they should wait for their dads to check the horses. Once the dads returned, the group headed toward the cafe. Casey suddenly stopped, staring at a poster of a woman on a golden horse in the window. That's her, isn't it? She asked, looking up at Zane. The poster read, Prescott Frontier Days Queen Champion Barrel Racer Cassie Collins. Zane's heart ached. Yes, honey, that's your mommy. Why doesn't she love us? Casey asked softly. Carol, sensing Zane's pain, scooped Casey into a hug. Sweetheart, your mommy loves you. Famous people have busy lives. It's hard, but she does love you. Tears filled Carol's eyes as she held Casey close, and her daughters, Stacy and Sammy, hugged her too. Zane turned away, wiping his eyes. Feeling his pain, Casey hugged him tightly. I'm sorry, Daddy. I don't care if she doesn't love us. I have you, and that's all I need. Carol smiled through her tears. You do have the best daddy in the world, Casey. The family gathered around a table, comforted by each other's love. I'm not saying your mommy is fool's gold or anything bad about her. She was my best friend, and she was a good mommy to you, Carol said gently. But just because she looks perfect in pictures doesn't mean she is. Leaving you and your dad was a big mistake. Zane worried this would stir things up, but the girls soon lost interest and asked to sit at their own table. As they moved, Carol turned to Zane and Brad. How could she just leave? She doesn't even call. No gifts, not even for Christmas or birthdays. I just don't understand it. Zane shrugged, glancing at his daughter happily chatting nearby. He shifted the conversation. We'll be at Cal's ranch in about an hour. If he's awake, we'll stay in the house. Otherwise, the trailers will do. Carol, still upset, joined the planning. It was their first rodeo since Cassie left, and if Carol saw her, a serious talk was inevitable. But for now, she moved forward like the others. On the way back to the trailers, Stacy turned and said, We love the new sponsor's trailers with the beach scenes. Carol smiled, and Brad nudged Zane. Your new oil contacts are doing wonders. Even if we don't win the rodeo, we'll enjoy the ride. As the engine started, Casey fell asleep, and Zane's mind wandered back to high school. He remembered Cassandra, the girl who had captivated everyone when she moved to Texas from Tennessee. Her charm won over both boys and girls, though she stayed just out of reach. Zane, determined, found his chance when she needed help with school. He was the top student, and though balancing rodeo and studies was tough, he gladly made time for her. Their study sessions often ended with a trip to Dairy Queen before Zane drove her home. Mrs. Collins was grateful for Zane's help and invited him for dinner, though her husband's absence on those nights left Zane uneasy. Still, Zane enjoyed spending time with Cassandra and her mom, so he didn't dwell on it. One evening after dinner, Cassandra walked him to his truck, took his hand, and pulled him close. Smiling, Zane leaned in for their first kiss. Zane had always been told he was a good kisser, but when he and Cassandra shared their first kiss, something magical happened, leaving them both breathless. Zane was deeply in love, and he thought Cassandra felt the same until she accepted a prom date with Jimmy, a senior. Cassandra insisted it was just for fun since Zane, a sophomore, couldn't go. Hurt, Zane convinced Suzanne, Jimmy's ex, to take him to the prom as a surprise. As the prom approached, Cassandra felt confused by Zane's sudden absence, but pushed through, excited for the big night with her perfect dress and charming date. Despite her giddiness, she knew she had no plans to be intimate with Jimmy. Her heart still belonged to Zane. On prom night, Cassandra and Jimmy arrived late, stealing the spotlight as they walked into the ballroom. But the attention soon shifted when Suzanne entered with Zane by her side. Zane looked sharp, and Suzanne radiated confidence, drawing admiration from the crowd. Tension filled the air as both couples moved around the room, each trying to enjoy the night. Suzanne played the role of Zane's new girlfriend flawlessly, while Cassandra struggled with Jimmy's lack of manners on the dance floor. When the votes were counted, Suzanne was crowned prom queen, and Jimmy became prom king. During their dance, Jimmy awkwardly began to apologize to Suzanne. Meanwhile, Cassandra couldn't resist pulling Zane onto the dance floor, trying to apologize for her own mistake. 10 years later, as Zane drove from Phoenix to Prescott, he wondered if that night had been the start of something real or an early warning sign he had ignored. Early the next morning, Cal knocked on the door of their living quarters with coffee and breakfast, letting them know the horses were fed and ready. They quickly dressed and made their way to the house, where Rosa welcomed them warmly with fresh tortillas, salsa, and breakfast tacos. The food was always amazing, and they were as grateful for Rosa as they were for Cal. He had hired her shortly after his wife passed away, and Rosa, a kind woman of 35, had come to his door offering help. Cal hired her immediately. Rosa had suffered great loss. Her husband and son were killed by a drug gang that tried to take boys from their village. When they resisted, they were shot. But their bravery inspired the villagers to drive the gang away. With nothing left, Rosa left her village and crossed the border into the U.S., eventually finding work on Cal's farm. 2 years later, she wore his ring and was expecting their child. After dinner, Cal announced he was taking the girls shopping for the rodeo. Rosa laughed, saying she needed clothes for after the baby arrived, knowing how much Cal adored her. The men, meanwhile, prepared the horses for their journey to Prescott, Arizona home of Frontier Days, one of many rodeos claiming to be the world's oldest. Brad and Zane had a strong season, placing in the top 5 at major Texas rodeos and winning big at Houston and San Angelo. Their success put them $8,000 ahead in team roping, and Zane $7,000 ahead in calf roping. With the National Finals Rodeo in Las Vegas looming, the prize money was tempting. The team had to decide. Should they chase the national tour or stick to their local circuit? For Zane, it was tough. After Cassandra left to pursue barrel racing, he stepped back from the national tour to focus on his daughter and the ranch. Brad, with fewer ties, had kept competing for 2 more years, but now faced the same choice: continue to Vegas or stay in Texas. Everyone had said Zane was a good kisser, but when he and Cassandra kissed, something special sparked between them. The goodbye kiss left them both breathless, and Zane believed they were in love until she accepted a prom date with Jimmy, a senior. Cassandra told Zane it was just for fun, since Zane, as a sophomore, couldn't attend the junior-senior prom. Though hurt at first, Zane grew angry and convinced Suzanne, Jimmy's ex, to take him to the prom. They kept their plan secret to surprise their exes. In the days leading up to the prom, Zane avoided Cassandra, who grew confused and upset. Her mom tried to explain why Zane might be hurt, but Cassandra was set on going, even though deep down she knew it was a mistake. She reassured herself that she and Zane weren't official, so it shouldn't matter. Prom night arrived, and Cassandra, with Jimmy by her side, made a grand entrance. All eyes were on them until Suzanne arrived with Zane, turning heads once again. They both played their parts perfectly, moving through the room and dancing to win votes for prom king and queen. When the results came in, Suzanne was crowned prom queen, and Jimmy took the title of king. As they danced, Jimmy awkwardly tried to apologize to Suzanne, while Cassandra grabbed Zane for their own dance and apology. 10 years later, driving from Phoenix to Prescott, Zane wondered if that moment had been the start of something beautiful or an early sign he had ignored. The next morning, Cal knocked on the door, bringing coffee and breakfast. He had already tended to the horses, and Rosa greeted them warmly in the kitchen with fresh tortillas, salsa, and breakfast tacos waiting. Zane and Casey supported themselves by selling cattle from their ranch, while Zane used his past rodeo winnings and income from training horses to invest in real estate and mineral rights in the Delaware Basin. His investments were guided by Cal, who had access to valuable insider information. Though it was risky, Zane took the leap and invested nearly all his savings. Brad, more cautious, put in half of what he had. 4 years later, both were thrilled with the results. Their earnings allowed Brad to upgrade his home with a pool and deck, while Zane bought an additional 320 acres, expanding his ranch to 960 acres of beautiful Texas hill country. The land's value had doubled, proving Zane's investment wise. With their financial success, they could choose whether to focus on business or chase rodeo championships. Coastal, their sponsor, sweetened the deal by increasing support, covering travel costs, and giving them trucks with a stunning beach-themed design that turned heads on the road. Despite their success, Zane faced personal heartache. Cassie, his wife, had left 4 years earlier to pursue the rodeo tour full-time. Zane had tried to convince her to stay and focus on their family, especially their young daughter, Casey. But her father urged her to seize the opportunity and she left with him, promising to return soon. Those promises faded as time passed, calls dwindled to once a week, then only on holidays and birthdays. Her visits became rare, and she seemed distant when she did return. Over time, Zane heard troubling stories from friends about Cassie's behavior on the road, partying, broken promises, and bad influences from her father. Eventually, Zane asked for proof, struggling to accept how much she had changed. It was a risky move, but Suds had a good feel for the steer and the barrier. Zane threw his rope on the second hop, catching the steer's horns perfectly. Brad followed, looping the legs cleanly, and they finished in 2 seconds. It wasn't their best, but it was the fastest time of the event so far. The announcer made sure everyone noticed. With 30 teams still to compete, their win wasn't guaranteed, but it was a strong run. Sonny, a fellow cowboy, joked, "Why do we even try when you're here? Rick and Joe took 8. 4 seconds on that steer last night, and you made it look easy." Brad grinned. "Thanks to Zane's skills." Afterward, Sonny invited Zane to host the traditional sing-along, and Zane agreed, knowing the kids wouldn't let him say no. Then he warmed up Junior for calf roping. Zane drew a fast calf, and as he prepared, he worried about Junior acting up after too long on the road. But when the gate opened, Junior took off smoothly. Zane threw the rope on the third jump, landing it perfectly. He secured the calf quickly and signaled the judge. The time was 9 seconds, fast enough to take the lead. Later, families gathered in front of Zane's trailer for the sing-along. Kids roasted marshmallows while Brad lit a fire pit. Zane grabbed his guitar and, along with Terry on banjo, led the group in songs like Red River Valley and Oh, Susanna. Parents and kids alike joined in. As the night went on and the children grew sleepy, they were tucked into their trailers, and Zane returned to find 3 young barrel racers listening from the back of a pickup, quietly enjoying the music. The barrel racers had moved closer but stayed behind the chairs. When Zane waved them up front, they jokingly declined, saying the tailgate was too comfy. Once the kids were asleep, the adults brought out drinks, and Zane accepted a Lone Star beer. As Terry played the banjo, Billy the Kid, a fun-loving bull rider, joined in with his harmonica. They kicked off the night with George Strait favorites like Amarillo by Morning and The Cowboy Rides Away, followed by Garth Brooks' The Beaches of Cheyenne, and Aaron Watson's tribute to Lane Frost. To lift the mood, they switched to upbeat songs like Meet Me in Montana and Wildwood Flower. Zane noticed the barrel racers singing along, so he invited them to sit closer, but they politely stayed where they were. Next, the women got up to dance to Baby's Got Her Blue Jeans On, joined by Carol and the other ladies. As the fun continued with Honky Tonk Badonkadonk, everyone was laughing and enjoying themselves, even the barrel racers, who still kept their distance. Zane observed one woman in a hoodie, unsure who she was, but noticing how much she was enjoying the moment. After a brief break, Billy's wife requested one last dance song. The group played Copperhead Road with Billy drumming on a bucket. The women's line dancing impressed everyone, despite their hoodies hiding their faces. As the night winded down, Zane sang Tennessee Whiskey, then a tribute to songwriter Bob McDill, playing songs like She Don't Know She's Beautiful and Good Old Boys Like Me. He encouraged the men to sing Amanda to their partners, emphasizing the love in their eyes more than perfect notes. By the end, many couples were cozied up together. Zane closed with the dance, explaining its deeper meaning. He reflected on how life is about taking risks, much like Teddy Roosevelt's Man in the Arena, reminding everyone to appreciate those who face challenges, whether they win or lose. As he sang, the evening felt bittersweet, but full of warmth and connection under the stars. Zane finished singing the dance, and the quiet settled over the group. Couples thanked him before heading to their trailers for the night. As Zane packed up, he noticed the barrel racers still deep in conversation. Curious, he approached. One of the girls tried to stand, but her friends held her back, teasing her. Zane felt a flutter of nervousness as he got closer. "Thanks for coming tonight, ladies. You made the sing-along special." He smiled, then stopped when he recognized the girl in the middle. It was Cassandra. "Hi, Zane. You sing beautifully. Thank you for letting us be part of this," she said, looking up shyly. His heart pounded, but he kept his tone casual. "You're welcome, Cassandra. You all were great." Lindsay, one of Cassandra's friends, chimed in. "You two should talk," before she and Renee left, leaving Zane alone with his ex-wife. Unsure of what to say, Zane broke the silence. "Do we really have much to talk about? It's been 2 years." Cassandra hesitated, then asked, "How's Red? I saw you riding another horse tonight. Is he okay?" Zane explained that Red was getting older, but still strong enough for the next big competition. Cassandra smiled as they briefly talked about their horses. Goldie, her prized mare, was still impressive, and Zane appreciated the referrals she'd sent his way for his horses. Then Cassandra's voice softened. "Can I see her?" Zane blinked, confused. "Goldie? No, our daughter, Casey. I saw her earlier, and I know I don't deserve it, but I want to see her." Zane knew better than to reopen old wounds, but he couldn't deny her request. With a nod, he gestured toward the trailer. Cassandra quietly followed him inside, moving toward the bunk where Casey slept. She gazed down at their daughter, her voice barely a whisper. "She's so beautiful." Emotions swirled between them, but Zane stood back, letting the moment be hers. Cassie knelt by Casey's bed, gently kissed her cheek. The little girl stirred, smiled at her mom, and fell back asleep. Cassie stood there for a few moments, hugging herself as the weight of her choices hit her. "Oh, God, what have I done?" she whispered, before rushing out of the trailer, her quiet sobs turning into uncontrollable tears as she ran off. Zane watched her leave, knowing she had finally realized the consequences of her actions. The morning practice runs went smoothly. Zane and Brad clocked in at 5, 0 seconds in team roping, giving them a solid lead with an average of 10, 2 seconds. In calf roping, Zane nailed a 7, 0-second run, leaving him well ahead of the competition. By noon, they packed up and began the 16-hour drive home, planning to stop at a friend's ranch in New Mexico for the night. The ranch was lively with 4 other families, kids playing in the heated pool. Joe Fay, Natalie's younger sister, made it clear she was interested in Zane, but he kept his focus on Casey, who joined the other kids for a sleepover in the house. Despite Joe's lively spirit and clear interest, Zane was exhausted after the long day. They spent the evening talking, but by 2 a.m. Zane was ready for rest. He politely told Joe she could either head inside or stay in the bed's other side. She stayed, but Zane was already thinking of their journey home the next day. As they drove through the mountains, the powerful engines of their trucks easily handled the trailers. With the speed limit stretching to 80 miles per hour and sometimes 90, they made good time across the flatlands of Texas. Zane's mind wandered as they passed wind turbines and oil pumps, a reminder of how much the landscape had changed. Suddenly, Casey's soft voice broke his thoughts. "Daddy, I had a strange dream. It started at the rodeo in Prescott and happened again last night. A blonde angel kissed me in my sleep, and when I woke up, it was Mommy, but she disappeared." Zane hesitated. Should he tell Casey about Cassie's visit? Instead, he asked, "How was last night's dream different?" "This time she kissed me, then got on a golden horse and raced off. She sparkled in the sun before she disappeared again." "Why do I keep having these dreams, Daddy?" "Maybe it's because you saw her at the rodeo. We're following the tour now, so you'll see her more, and maybe you can talk to her." "Graham says Grandpa tricked her into leaving us." Casey's voice was firm. "Sweetie, it's not nice to talk that way. Just call him your grandfather." "I'll never call him Grandpa. He took my mommy away." Casey's eyes held a determined stare, and Zane felt the pain behind her words. "I hate him!" Casey declared, her voice unwavering. Without waiting for a reply, she turned away, retreating into the sleeper area, focusing on her iPad to distract herself. Zane's thoughts drifted to Cassie. Graham always said she had been the best mother until she left so suddenly, and Zane couldn't disagree. Cassie had been an amazing girlfriend and wife before everything changed. He remembered their engagement like it was yesterday. The day after graduation, they went to their favorite swimming spot by the Llano River. After swimming for a while, Cassie called out that she was hungry. As she stood waiting, Zane knelt down not to grab food, but a small velvet box. Cassie's eyes widened in surprise when he opened it to reveal a topaz ring surrounded by diamonds. "Will you marry me?" Zane asked, full of love. "I know we're only 18, but I can't imagine life without you." Tears of joy filled Cassie's eyes as she dropped to her knees. "Yes, Zane, I will marry you. We'll face everything together." They shared a kiss filled with promise and excitement for the future, deeply connected. Those were the memories Zane held on to, the moments when everything felt perfect before it all changed. Their relationship had always been filled with affection. Zane vividly remembered the tenderness they shared, like the time they found comfort in each other's arms. He had spent that evening softly kissing her neck and ears, tracing gentle patterns on her arms. They had moved slowly, savoring the closeness between them. Cassie's soft sighs, her warm response, made the moment feel intense. When they lay together afterward, it wasn't just about physical connection, it was something deeper. They had shared many affectionate moments before, but that one felt different, more profound. Cassie had held on to him tightly, both of them lost in the moment, overwhelmed by their emotions. "Wow," Cassie had whispered afterward, wonder in her voice. "I've never felt anything like that." Zane had been equally amazed. "Me neither," he admitted. "It's something you can't put into words." They stayed wrapped in each other's arms, savoring the intimacy and warmth that followed. Even though they were young, they both knew that moment was something they'd never forget, a shared bond that had once made them inseparable. Their bond only grew stronger as they explored new feelings together, deepening their connection. Cassie tried different movements, enjoying the moment as Zane responded with pleasure. When he held her hips and moved with her, she gasped, feeling overwhelmed by the sensation. Afterward, they rested in each other's arms, feeling the closeness that came with their deepening relationship. Later, Red, Zane's horse, greeted them eagerly. Casey fed him an apple while Zane let the travel horses stretch their legs. After settling the animals, they moved their belongings from the trailer to the house, ready to spend a few weeks at home. Their first stop was a visit to Zane's parents, Sue and David, where they enjoyed catching up before heading to Graham's house for a big family dinner. As they arrived, Zane joked about the welcome home party for the rodeo folks, and Sue mentioned the pies and David's homemade ice cream. After the meal, Brad thanked Ella and Sue for the delicious spread while the girls went outside to play. The men lingered over sweet tea, chatting about ranch life and their plans for the summer rodeos, while the women handled the dishes. As the conversation shifted to their travels, Elle hesitated before asking, "Did you see my daughter?" Zane nodded, offering a smile. "We did at Prescott. She looked healthy and lovely, leading the grand entry as rodeo queen." "Did you talk to her?" Elle asked quietly. "We spoke briefly after the sing-along. She wanted to see Casey. She didn't wake her, but looked at her for a while." Zane paused, then added, "Casey later told me she had a dream that her mom was an angel who came to visit her." The room grew quiet, each person feeling the weight of the unspoken sadness, but also the lingering hope that somehow their fractured family might find peace again. Zane remained silent, unsure how to respond. Cassie's mother, Elle, wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. "I'm glad she wants to see her daughter, but did she say anything about the future?" Zane shook his head. Carol reached out and touched Zane's hand. "I've been meaning to tell you this. Now seems like the right time, so please listen," she said, glancing at Elle before continuing. "The morning after we saw Cassie, she came to our trailer and asked if we could talk. I hadn't spoken to her since she left, so I was cold at first, but she begged for just 5 minutes." Elle nodded as Carol continued. "Cassie told me about seeing Casey at the grand entry and how heartbroken she was. She talked about how it felt listening to you sing, Zane, especially when you introduced the dance. Then she broke down when she saw Casey with Cal, realizing what she had done." Carol paused, her voice wavering. "I told her something I probably shouldn't have, Elle, but it just came out. I shared what Casey asked Zane when she saw her poster in Phoenix. She stared at it for a long time, then turned to Zane and asked, "Why doesn't she love us, Daddy?" Everyone at the table fell silent, tears filling their eyes. Carol continued, "When I told Cassie that, she collapsed in tears. I made us both coffee and listened as she opened up. She told me about hitting rock bottom almost 2 years ago. She woke up one morning, hungover and filled with regret, and saw people gathering for cowboy church outside her window. She felt drawn to it. Cassie had tidied up, walked over, and listened as the preacher spoke about being reborn in Christ, no matter how bad your mistakes. She heard testimonies, including one from a young woman who had turned her life around after years of drugs and alcohol. The woman shared that she had found a new beginning in faith and had even made a vow to remain abstinent until marriage. Cassie was moved, recognizing herself in the young woman's story. When the preacher finished, Cassie stayed, unable to speak or move. The young woman, her husband, and the preacher approached her. The woman took Cassie's hands and asked if she was okay. Cassie found her voice and admitted, "I'm like you were, before you found your way." They prayed together, and Cassie felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The preacher blessed water from a nearby trough and gently poured it over Cassie's head, symbolizing her cleansing. She wept, feeling as though a weight had been lifted from her soul. She said that moment changed her, Carol finished softly, but she knows it doesn't erase the pain she caused. She's trying to make amends, starting with Casey. Zane sat quietly, taking it all in. Elle wiped her eyes, trying to hold back her emotions. It was a lot to process, but it gave them a glimpse into Cassie's struggle for redemption. The young woman at Cowboy Church encouraged Cassie to make a promise to give up alcohol and drugs and start fresh. Moved to tears, Cassie agreed, spoke her pledge aloud, and signed a promise card. Carol paused, looking at Zane. "I can see you're all as surprised as I was." Zane was speechless, shocked by the transformation. Cassie had never been deeply religious, only attending church with him because her family didn't have one. The idea that she had found faith and was recovering from her past was hard for him to process. Taking a deep breath, Zane asked, "How much of this do you believe, Carol? If she's been clean for almost 2 years, why hasn't she tried to reach out? Why stay away from her daughter and family?" Carol nodded. "I asked her the same thing. She told me her guilt was overwhelming. She felt her mistakes were so serious that she didn't deserve to see her daughter or her family again. But recently, her mentor encouraged her to face her fears and try reconnecting. She was scared you'd be angry, but you were kind and let her see Casey, which gave her hope." Carol continued, recounting Cassie's words. "I never stopped loving Zane and Casey, even at my lowest. I regret what I became, and I know it's hard to believe, but I was lost. My father convinced me that drugs would help me succeed, and I believed him. I thought Zane and Casey were burdens, but now I see how wrong I was. My choices spiraled out of control, and by the time I realized it, I was sick and lost. But that Sunday morning at Cowboy Church, I felt something change. I've been clean for 2 years, and I'm hoping to be part of Casey's life again." The room was silent, everyone processing what Carol had shared. Elle, her voice trembling, asked, "Did you get her phone number? I'd like to talk to her." Carol nodded and offered to text it to anyone who wanted it, including Zane, even though he remained quiet. Later that night, Zane put Casey to bed, still thinking about Cassie's revelations. His world had been turned upside down again. In the following weeks, Zane and Brad focused on their ranches and took some time off before hitting the rodeo circuit again. They traveled to Pecos, Texas, Reno, Nevada, and several other stops, but Zane didn't see Cassie until Cheyenne. Cassie quietly approached with a lawn chair during Zane's sing-along, dressed casually in shorts and a tee. She was greeted warmly by others, but Zane looked away before she noticed him. Casey, busy singing with her friends, hadn't noticed her mother either. But during a break, she saw her. "Daddy," Casey whispered, confused. "Yes, honey, that's her. Why don't you go say hi and introduce your friends?" "I think she would like that," Zane replied, nudging Casey forward. "But Daddy," Casey began to protest. "No buts, Casey. Stacy, Sammy, come on. Let's go say hello to Casey's mom, Cassie." "The sparkly lady from the poster with the golden horse? She's here?" Sammy asked excitedly. Zane nodded and the girls held hands as they walked over to Cassie. Cassandra, this is Brad and Carol's daughters, Stacy and Sammy, Zane said. Cassie stood up from her chair, knelt down, and greeted the girls warmly, shaking their hands. Casey watched her mother closely as Cassie's lip trembled, but she smiled through it, asking the girls about their trip to Wyoming and the big carnival. Zane then said, "I'll leave them with you for a moment while I take care of something." Cassie nodded, her voice quiet. "Thank you." Zane walked away, noticing Brad, Carol, and others watching him with curiosity. It seemed his friendly interaction with Cassie was causing quite a stir. 10 minutes later, Zane returned from his trailer with a new classical guitar. "I'm still learning, so go easy on me," he joked. Cassie was now surrounded by several more kids, entertaining them while Brad and Carol watched from nearby, smiling at how naturally she connected with the children. Zane led the group in a series of uplifting songs, "Will the Circle Be Unbroken," "In the Sweet By and By," "Amazing Grace," and more. As the kids started to tire, Zane paused, noticing Casey resting in Cassie's lap, too sleepy to go to bed but content in her mother's arms. "Mommy can hold me while Daddy plays," Casey said quietly. Cassie looked encouraged, and Zane, though uncertain, agreed. Zane shifted the mood, introducing a set of songs from the late 1950s and early 1960s. He sang "Let It Be Me" and "Wake Up Little Susie" by the Everly Brothers, followed by "All I Have to Do Is Dream," explaining how it resonated with rodeo cowboys and cowgirls missing their families. He moved on to Ricky Nelson's "Poor Little Fool" and "Lonesome Town," before finishing with a few Elvis classics, "Love Me Tender" and "I Can't Help Falling in Love." He encouraged the men to sing along, creating a sentimental, intimate moment. As the evening wound down and people began leaving, Zane found himself alone with Cassie, still holding a sleeping Casey. Cassie's voice was determined but soft. "Zane, we both know you were never the fool. I was. You took care of our child, our ranch, and everything else while I threw it away. I let others treat me poorly, and I disrespected our marriage. You were always doing what was right for us, and I was too lost to see it. Carol told me she shared my story with you, so I won't go into it again. I know I don't deserve the chance to be part of Casey's life after all I've done, but if you could find it in your heart to give me another chance, just to see her, I promise to respect your boundaries and follow whatever rules you set." Zane looked at her, his emotions mixed. "I could say your promises don't mean much, but I won't. Let me think about it, and we'll talk again later. We're staying here for a bit, so check back when you're ready." Cassie looked relieved. "Would you like to put her to bed?" Zane took Casey and carried her to bed. That night he had a strange dream of a blonde figure asking for help, waking up in the cold Wyoming morning feeling unsettled. 2 days later, after a successful day in team roping and calf roping, Brad and Carol invited Zane to host another gathering. Brad promised to grill hot dogs and burgers if Zane led another sing-along. Zane, eager to practice more on his new guitar, happily agreed. After dinner, Zane had the kids singing along to cheerful songs like "She'll Be Coming Around the Mountain" and "I've Been Working on the Railroad." They paused for dessert, but the relaxed atmosphere was interrupted when a loud pickup truck pulled up, blaring music. A voice shouted, "Hey Zane, good to see you back. We appreciate you letting us enjoy the good times." Recognizing the voice, Zane calmly picked up a couple of rocks from the ground, ready for trouble. Casey, sitting on her mom's lap, looked confused while Cassie appeared upset. Without getting up, Zane shouted, "Why don't you boys come over here and talk? I can't hear you over that music." "Nah," Rick yelled back. "You sit there and sing to your wives. We'll have our fun while you're gone." The crowd stood up as Rick revved his engine and spun the truck's tires on the gravel. Zane threw one rock through the open driver's window, hitting Rick on the chin and silencing the music. The second rock shattered the windshield and hit the passenger. Rick lost control, bumping into a post by the horse barn. His truck stalled, and the passengers inside began shouting, "Let's go! They're coming for us!" As a group of cowboys reached the truck, some lifted the back wheels off the ground while others pulled open the doors. Rick revved the engine, but it was no use. The 4 young men were dragged out of the truck and taken into an empty barn. Zane didn't join the scuffle, but arrived at the barn just in time to see Rick get punched in the stomach. A large man pulled back his fist to strike again, growling, "You think you can talk like that?" "Wait," Zane called out. The man paused, surprised. "Come on, Zane, we're just handling business." Zane stepped forward. This one is mine. Rick, you had a lot to say earlier. Why don't you repeat it now, face to face? Rick, trying to save face, smirked weakly. We were just joking, Zane. Wanted to welcome you back, that's all. Zane's voice grew cold. Still a coward, I see. You can't handle pressure, and you can't face a man alone. Here's what's going to happen. You and your friends are going to hand over your belts and take the punishment you deserve, or we can drive your truck off the canyon with you in it. Your choice. One of Rick's friends panicked. I didn't know this would happen. I thought we were just hanging out. Please, let me go. Another started crying, pleading not to be harmed. Zane stepped closer, giving them a hard look. All right. You either take your punishment or face the cliff. What's it going to be? One of the boys reluctantly handed over his belt, trembling. Zane turned back to Rick, grabbing him by the collar and lifting him to his toes. You think you're untouchable, Rick? You're about to find out otherwise. Zane held Rick by the collar, the tension thick in the air. Maybe I should mess you up before we finish this. But don't worry. No one's going to hear from you again, he said, watching Rick's face turn pale. After a long silence, Zane released Rick, who gasped for air, visibly shaken. I'm sorry, Rick stammered. Shut up, Zane interrupted. I don't want your apology. You've got two choices. Hand over your belt or let Brad handle this another way. What's it going to be? Rick, trembling, unhooked his belt. Whipping, he muttered, his voice weak. Zane took the belt and ordered, Now get your pants down. Rick hesitated, but Zane lifted him by the collar again. This isn't just about what you said tonight. This is for all the people you've bullied and hurt, hiding behind your dad's money. That ends now. Rick, his fear evident, unbuttoned his jeans and dropped them. He obeyed Zane's command to kneel, and Zane delivered a hard strike with the belt. Rick cried out, and someone gagged him to stifle the noise. Brad and Clay followed with their own strikes, each blow harder than the last. Rick collapsed, unconscious from the pain. Who's next? Clay asked, glaring at Rick's terrified friends. The remaining boys, shaking and crying, quickly surrendered, nodding in agreement that they had learned their lesson. Brad stepped forward. Good. Now take your friend back to the truck. And listen closely. If you try to bring the law into this, you'll regret it. The boys hoisted Rick into the truck bed, one of them driving them away in silence. As they left, the men returned to their families, apologizing for being gone so long and eager to put the incident behind them. Zane picked up his guitar, apologizing for the long break, and asked if the group wanted to continue the sing-along or call it a night. The peaceful evening resumed, with the tension from the confrontation fading. Rick's behavior changed overnight. The next day he drove carefully, sitting on a pillow for comfort, rumors swirling about what had happened. Tales of his bad behavior finally catching up to him spread through the rodeo circuit. Though the darker details were left unsaid, everyone knew he'd been humiliated. Before long, Rick stopped coming to rodeos altogether and no one missed him. The general sentiment was, good riddance. After a brief sing-along, Cassandra took Casey to Zane's trailer, tucked her into bed, and kissed her goodnight. Then she began telling Zane her story, starting with when she and her father left the ranch to chase their dreams, to the moment everything spiraled out of control, and finally, her eventual reckoning. Zane listened quietly as Cassandra revealed the loneliness she felt after leaving home, and how her father mocked her marriage and daughter, introducing her to alcohol and drugs. She admitted resisting at first, but after winning a major rodeo title, she fell deeper into her father's influence. He brought men to their trailer, took her to wild parties, and fueled her descent. Cassandra spoke of waking up hungover, dreading the media, and the brief, degrading acting roles her father pushed her toward. Looking directly at Zane, she said, Zane, after I betrayed you, lying became easy. I used substances to numb the pain of what I'd done to forget you and Casey. I reached out only during holidays because it was too hard to face my reality. Yes, everything you heard about me is true. I made terrible choices. She paused, her voice filled with regret. It was easy to take the pills and use any man to forget how far I'd fallen. Cassie's voice trembled as she finished her story, admitting how hard it had been to face sobriety and confront her mistakes. Being sober forced her to confront the memories of everything she'd lost, Zane, her daughter, her friends. Her so-called friends had turned out to be people like Rick, and she had spiraled, trapped in a life she couldn't escape. But then, something bigger intervened, pulling her out of the darkness. It was past 3 in the morning by the time she finished. Exhausted, Zane offered her a place to sleep in the bunk above Casey, hoping it would help them reconnect. Cassie declined, but invited him to breakfast at her trailer the next morning. He agreed, and they said their goodbyes. Alone, Zane mulled over everything she had said. Part of him wanted to dig deeper, ask about her past relationships, but he knew it wouldn't change anything. He already had the pictures, the stories. His imagination had filled in the blanks. Why force her to relive those dark moments? She had admitted her wrongs, confessed to her past mistakes, and now wanted to be there for their daughter. She hadn't asked for a second chance with him, just with Casey. Could he deny her that? People could change. She wasn't the same person she had been 2 years ago. Why should those years define her forever? Zane sighed and pushed the thoughts away. It was too much for one night. He needed sleep. The next morning, Casey was dressed and ready by 8:45, eager to see her mom. Zane, still busy with the horses, finished up and they headed to Cassie's trailer. Cassie greeted them warmly, hugging Casey before inviting them inside. She handed Zane a cup of strong coffee, and they shared small talk about their sleep. Breakfast was simple but delicious. Zane couldn't help but notice how good Cassie looked. She wore loose red shorts and a white shirt tied at the waist, her golden hair falling softly on her shoulders. She caught him glancing and smiled. "Caught you looking," Zane joked. Cassie laughed lightly. "Thanks, but I know I'm too skinny," she said, smiling more genuinely. Zane felt a shift inside him. The anger he had held onto for so long had faded, replaced by a sense of loss and regret. There was still hesitation, but he no longer burned with rage. The morning passed easily, with Casey spending time with her mom. After lunch and a nap in her mother's bed, Casey woke full of energy, dragging Cassie outside to find Zane. They found him with Brad, Carol, and other friends. Casey bounced excitedly. "Daddy, can we go to the carnival in the Old West Museum?" Cassie asked if she had time to change, but the women around her laughed. "You're fine," Carol said. "You're wearing shorts like the rest of us. Just grab some sneakers." With everyone in good spirits, they set off toward the carnival. Zane explained the plans for the day, mentioning they had extra time before the next event so they could all relax and have some fun. Zane chuckled when Cassie said, "I gave up some personal time, but I'm fine." His playful remark about women and their love for drama sparked a round of good-natured scolding from the women in their group. Rambo summed up the men's feelings with a grin. "I'd rather be somewhere else." The day at the fair was more exciting for the kids, while the museum intrigued the adults. Everyone enjoyed the botanic gardens, and after a nice meal, they made their way back to the trailers. Casey alternated between holding her mom's and dad's hands, insisting they swing her like they used to. Zane and Cassie avoided touching, but when it happened, they exchanged small smiles, with one quietly apologizing and the other smiling back. Carol kept a watchful eye on the situation. While she noticed the occasional shy glances and accidental touches between Zane and Cassie, she remained cautious, not completely trusting Cassie yet. However, Cassie's behavior seemed playful rather than manipulative, and Carol relaxed a little. Even the men weren't immune to noticing Cassie, with Brad sneaking a glance as she tied her shoes. Carol nudged him with a smirk, and he shrugged, saying without words, "Men are men." Judy and Sarah also played into the attention, knowing they enjoyed being admired just as much. Later that evening, they gathered for a relaxed meal of grilled burgers and sausages. Zane noticed Cassie quietly praying before each meal, but never asking others to join her, keeping it private. As the cool Wyoming night settled in, they wrapped up around 9:30 and said their goodbyes. When Zane asked Cassie to help get Casey ready for bed, Cassie was pleasantly surprised. She gladly accepted, read 2 books to Casey, and helped her say her night prayers. "I love you," Casey said, giving both her parents a kiss before drifting off to sleep. Cassie's eyes filled with tears as she turned to Zane. "You really are the best daddy in the world. I'm so sorry for everything that happened and how it affected our daughter." Without waiting for a response, she quickly left for her trailer. Feeling more confused than before, Zane cleaned up and went to bed, where he once again dreamed of an angel needing his help. The next morning, Zane couldn't sleep, so he waited for the coffee to brew at dawn. As he took his first sip, a soft knock came at the door. He cautiously asked, "Who is it?" "It's Lindsay," came the reply. "I need to talk to you." Zane opened the door and confirmed it was Lindsay, one of Cassie's closest friends. He invited her in, offering her a cup of coffee. Lindsay sat at the table, her tone serious as she began. "Zane, I'm going to get straight to the point. Yes, Cassie has really changed. I know it's hard to believe, but I've been with her since that Sunday she turned her life around, and she's stuck to her promises. But there's something she hasn't told you, her father. When she cut ties with him, he came after her with lawyers trying to enforce a ridiculous agreement. My brother, who's a lawyer, helped sort it out, but recently he's been watching her again. He's got some dangerous people involved, and she's scared. I'm really worried about what he might do, Zane." Lindsay's words struck a chord with Zane. "You're making things harder for her without realizing it. The kinder you are, the worse she feels. She wishes you would yell at her, punish her for what she did. Instead, you're letting her be with her daughter and your friends, which is breaking her heart because she knows she's ruined any chance of a future with you." Zane stood up, refilling their coffee cups, his voice calm but filled with frustration. "What do you expect me to do, Lindsay? Should I keep her away from Casey like she's kept herself away? How does abandoning her daughter help anyone? You know how painful it's been watching Casey cry on her birthday, waiting for a call that never comes. She's missed everything for 2 years, holidays, birthdays, everything." Lindsay sat in stunned silence as Zane continued. "You and Carol believe she's different now, but I still see the same selfish person who left us. If she truly realized her mistakes, why didn't she come back sooner? Why didn't she reach out to Casey, ask for forgiveness, or even send a gift? Instead, she stayed away, leaving us all to deal with the fallout." Lindsay hesitated, then spoke softly. "She didn't feel like she deserved to come back." Zane's response was sharp. "If she truly felt unworthy, she would have sought forgiveness, not run away. Feeling sorry for herself doesn't make her a good mother. She was loved by me, by Casey, and she turned away from that. Now she thinks she can just step back in. Casey barely knows her anymore. I'll let her see Casey, but I'm doing it for my daughter, not for her. And if she hurts Casey again, she won't like the consequences." Lindsay listened, her expression serious. "Zane, I understand now. I didn't see it from your side before. Cassie regrets everything deeply, but regret alone doesn't fix things. She wants to move forward and be there for Casey." Zane sighed. "If she wants to be in Casey's life, she needs to stop dwelling on the past and show us the person she claims to be now. No more apologies. If she's changed, she needs to prove it. I've known her for years. She's smart, ambitious, and beautiful, but those things don't matter if her heart isn't in the right place. She has to show us that." Taking a deep breath, Zane softened his tone. "Tell her to meet us at my trailer at noon, wearing shorts and a swimsuit. We're heading to Kurt Gowdy State Park to kayak and enjoy the day. There will be families and kids, and it's her chance to show us who she really is now. If she can't, she should write Casey a letter and leave again." He added with a smile, "You and your friends are welcome to join us. We'll have plenty of room in my truck if you want to ride." Lindsay smiled back. "That's the best offer I've had in months, but I'll take my truck. Let's make it a good day." Lindsay smiled and said, "You'll need to sit on towels to keep my seats dry, but I can fit 6 people, and there's plenty of room in the back for coolers. Deal?" Zane rolled his eyes, grinning. "Just tell me your seats aren't pink. Gotta keep my tough guy image." She laughed, shook her head, and leaned in to kiss him gently on the cheek, lingering for a moment. "You smell nice. See you at noon," she said as she left. Lindsay's truck was sleek and comfortable. Zane, Casey, and another barrel racer, Lacey, rode in the back, while Lindsay, Renee, and Cassie sat up front. They made their way to Kurt Gowdy State Park, where Sarah had organized the day's activities. Donnie, Sarah's brother, had already set up a barbecue, and everyone contributed drinks, snacks, and supplies. It was a perfect day for the kids, with a playground, ball games, and a cool lake for swimming. After a fun meal, the younger kids resisted nap time but fell asleep quickly, allowing the moms to relax by the water. Zane noticed that Cassie, after helping with cleanup and putting Casey down for a nap, joined the group in her swimsuit. Though modest, her presence caught the attention of several young men. Zane found it amusing and swam out to a floating raft to escape the scene. As he closed his eyes, the raft shifted. He opened them to see Cassie wringing out her wet hair. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "I don't mind, but those guys on the beach might miss you," he teased. "They're busy planning a paddleboard trip," she said with a grin. "I told them no. Last time I tried that was when you took me to South Padre Island, and we both know how that went." "You did great once you figured out the balance," Zane replied. "Timing the waves was tricky, but you got it." Cassie smiled, remembering their trip, but her expression soon faded as she thought about everything she had missed. "We really did have a wonderful time. I haven't been back to the coast. Have you?" "Yeah, Casey and I have gone the last 2 years to Port Aransas. She loves it, feeding the seagulls, playing in the waves. She got so carried away feeding them once, I thought they might carry her off." Cassie laughed with him, but the realization that she had missed these moments hit hard. She should have been there, making memories with her family, not chasing rodeo wins in towns she barely remembered. Zane noticed the change in her mood. "You've missed some memories," he said gently, "but you can still create more. She's your priority now, and I'll help however I can because she needs her mom." Cassie nodded, emotion filling her voice. "I want to be there for her, to answer the questions she's starting to ask." They spent the next half hour talking about the ranch, Zane's parents, and Cassie's mother, enjoying the peaceful moment. When Brad whistled and Carol waved, little Casey was rubbing her sleepy eyes. They rejoined the group and spent the rest of the afternoon together. Their first adventure was a canoe ride around the lake, which made Casey squeal with excitement. Cassie, nervous at first, did well in the canoe, and they marveled at the wildlife and clear water. As they paddled, Zane enjoyed the view from the back of the canoe, realizing that maybe Cassie wasn't so fragile after all. Back on shore, the kids shared fishing rods, catching a few fish before releasing them unharmed. Later, Sarah led a group hike to Hidden Springs, with 6 volunteers to watch the kids. Zane noticed Cassie struggling to keep up and asked if she was okay. "I'm fine," she said, "but I need to get in better shape. Years of tough living caught up to me, and I haven't really tried to change. I just drive to the next rodeo, stay in the trailer except for the grand entry, barrel runs, or interviews, and then do it all again. My friends call me the old lady, and sometimes I feel like one." Zane smiled. "You used to be so careful about staying fit." "I've lost the motivation. I don't have anyone to make me put in the effort," she admitted. "You do now, your daughter," Zane reminded her gently. "You need to stay healthy for her." Cassie smiled warmly. "Yes, I guess I do." The Hidden Springs, while peaceful, weren't as impressive as expected. But Cassie, determined, kept up better on the hike back, sweating and breathing hard but pushing herself. That evening, they gathered for a casual dinner and sat in a half-circle of chairs. Renee sighed playfully. "If only we had someone to play guitar and lead us in song." Zane smirked. "Don't look at me, I didn't bring my guitar." "You didn't?" Carol chimed in. "But Bob and I did." She handed him his guitar. With a dramatic sigh, Zane gave in. "All right, but everyone's singing, even you tough bull riders hiding over there." The group laughed as the girls urged the boys to join in. Cassie sat up front with Casey and the younger kids, quickly becoming popular among them. Zane led everyone in classic Western songs like "She'll Be Coming Round the Mountain," with even the toughest cowboys joining in for the chorus. The group continued with the Yellow Rose of Texas, Ghost Riders in the Sky, and even some yodeling during Cattle Call. By the end, the rough bull riders were having as much fun as the kids, and they asked to join future sing-alongs. On the ride back, Casey fell asleep between her parents, leaving Cassie and Zane to chat lightly with the others. Cassie stayed quiet during gossip about crushes and tour mistakes, but seemed comfortable and engaged when the conversation shifted. After returning, Cassie carried Casey to bed, changed her into pajamas, and whispered, "I love you," before turning to Zane. A thoughtful expression crossed her face, but instead of lingering, she said, "I had a great time today. See you tomorrow," and left for her trailer. Zane realized his earlier suggestions to Lindsay might have had an effect. There were no apologies from Cassie today, just genuine effort to reconnect with Casey and the other parents. She seemed more confident and mature, focused on the present rather than her past mistakes. On Saturday, Zane, Brad, and Cassie prepared for the final show of the second round. They knew the times they needed to beat for a spot in the finals. Zane and Brad worked smoothly with Suds, the steer, securing a time that was slower than usual but still good enough for second place and a finals position. Zane followed up with a solid tie-down run, clocking in at 11 seconds, which put him in first place overall. Cassie outperformed the field in her event, earning a spot in the finals with a half-second lead. The night was a success for all three, and they celebrated with their families while enjoying a Dierks Bentley concert. Casey, exhausted by the end, was carried back to the trailer by Zane. Cassie helped get her ready for bed, and they both kissed her goodnight before Cassie returned to her trailer. The next day, Cowboy Church featured a moving sermon titled, "It's Never Too Late." Cassie was deeply emotional, quietly crying during the service. Casey comforted her, and Cowboy Bob congratulated Cassie on her sobriety, suggesting Zane meet with him afterward. After the final event, where they won several first-place and average awards, Zane met Cowboy Bob, who shared insights about Cassie's struggles with her father and management. Bob asked about Zane's relationship with her. Zane explained they were just co-parents, unsure if that would ever change. Bob encouraged him to consider a future with Cassie, noting her growth and commitment to her faith. Cassie had rodeo commitments in Idaho and Montana, so after an emotional goodbye with Casey and a brief hug with Zane, she headed west. Zane and Brad took the scenic route back to Texas, stopping near Fort Collins, Colorado to explore Rocky Mountain National Park with their families. They marveled at the beauty, hiked the alpine trails, and stayed in a cabin near a cold mountain creek. The kids were delighted by the icy water, and nights by the fire provided a cozy end to their days. The rest of the week took them to rodeos in Castle Rock, Colorado, and Dodge City, Kansas, as they continued their journey on the rodeo circuit. After winning more prizes in Dodge City, Zane and Brad began the long drive back to the Texas Hill Country. Tired from the late start, they stopped at a truck stop near Childress to rest before finishing the trip the next morning. Once back at the ranch, they unloaded the horses and started settling in when the phone rang. It was Graham Collins, inviting them to lunch with Grandmama, Grandpa Reese, and the Simpsons. Casey was thrilled, excited to share all about her time with her mommy. The meal was a feast, and everyone enjoyed second helpings, followed by delicious desserts. Casey and the Simpson girls chattered non-stop about Cassie and how wonderful their time together had been. Carol shared stories about Cassie, reminding everyone of the kind, loving person she had been before leaving with her father. Zane's mom noticed he had been quiet during the conversation. "Zane, do you have anything to add?" "Not really," he said. "She really cares for Casey, and seeing them together makes me happy." He smiled at his daughter. "Is Cassie coming to see us soon?" Elle asked. "She has plans in Idaho first, but she mentioned coming to Texas afterward. We'll hear from her soon unless she changes her mind," Zane replied, just as his phone beeped with a message. Cassie had texted, "Still okay if I visit Casey and Goldie's baby sister? I'll call Mom if it's fine." Zane smiled as he replied, "Sure." Almost immediately, Elle received a call. "Hello?" she answered, a bit uncertain. "Mama, it's Cassandra. I want to come back to Texas for a little while and stay with you. Is that okay?" "Honey, I was upset, but not anymore. We've been talking about you, and I've heard wonderful things. Yes, you're welcome to come stay with me. It would make my day." "Thank you, Mama. Are Zane and everyone there?" "Yes, dear. They're enjoying Sue's peach cobbler and David's homemade ice cream. Want to talk to Zane?" "Yes. And when I come home, can we have a meal like that? I'm already hungry just thinking about it." Elle smiled. "We'll make you something special, right, Sue, David?" "Oh, absolutely." Sue laughed, and Carol chimed in, "And I'll help." Everyone heard Cassie choke up a little. "Can I talk to Casey?" Casey was beyond excited to hear from her mother and eagerly told her about all the adventures they'd had, from seeing elk in Estes Park to their trip to Dodge City, where they learned about Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson. The conversation wasn't quick, with Casey animatedly recounting every detail, and Cassie listening intently, her voice filled with joy. When Casey finally wound down, she passed the phone to Zane. "Mommy wants to talk to you now, Daddy." Zane chuckled as he took the phone. "Well, that'll teach you not to ask her what she's been up to." Cassie's laugh echoed through the phone. "You have no idea how much I loved hearing her. She fills my heart with joy." "We loved it too," Zane said. "She's a happy little girl again, and I thank you for that. So what's on your mind?" Cassie's tone shifted, softening with emotion. "Zane, I won't dwell on the past, but I want to ask if it's okay if I come home. To stay with Mom, of course." Zane smiled. "Of course, it's okay. Did you think I wouldn't want you around, seeing your daughter and Goldie Jr.? That's just your worries talking?" Cassie exhaled, relieved. "Thank you, Zane. I'm leaving tonight from Caldwell." Zane smiled, knowing how much this meant to her. "Safe travels. We'll see you soon." Lindsay had a driver bringing her truck home and was waiting for Cassie to join her for the drive to Albuquerque. They planned to leave after Cassie's run, but when 10:30 came and went, Zane started to worry. Cassie hadn't called and wasn't answering her phone. Zane called Lindsay, who picked up immediately, sounding worried. "Zane, have you heard from Cassie? I'm in her truck, but she hasn't shown up. I'm starting to get scared." "Stay on the line, Lindsay," Zane said, trying to reassure her. "Maybe she got delayed by a sponsor." Lindsay took a flashlight from the truck and walked around, keeping Zane on speakerphone. Halfway down the path, she found a phone in the dirt, Cassie's phone, with Casey's picture on the screen. "Zane, I found her phone." "Do you see anything else? Any security cameras? Anyone nearby?" Zane asked. "There's a trailer I don't recognize," Lindsay said. "I'll knock." A woman opened the door, and a man appeared behind her. "Yes, we saw something," the man said. "A woman was walking when a dark SUV pulled up. Two big men grabbed her and put her in the car. An older man came out and told us she was his daughter, and they were taking her to get help." Zane, still on speaker, demanded, "Did you call the police?" "No," the woman said. "The man said she had a drug problem." "You need to call 911 right now," Zane ordered. "You saw a kidnapping. This isn't something you ignore. Stay put and give the police every detail you can remember." Turning back to Lindsay, Zane said, "Stay with them, Lindsay. Get everything you can for the police. I'll call back in an hour." Zane hung up and immediately called his friend Cal for help. Then he called Elle, who contacted Sue, while Zane called Brad. Within an hour, David, Sue, and Elle were at Zane's house to stay with Casey, and Brad arrived to take Zane to Gillespie County Airport. Cal had arranged a private jet for Zane, and they needed to catch it in Fredericksburg. Brad drove Zane to the airport, and they made a quick stop for coffee, though Zane barely touched his. When the Embraer Phenom 300E touched down, Zane thanked Brad, dashed to the plane, and they were airborne within minutes. The jet had enough fuel to get straight to Albuquerque and then onward to Caldwell, Idaho. Just before dawn, they landed in Idaho, where Cal was waiting along with a group that included a sharp-dressed man, several young women, and 5 large men in camouflage. Cal approached Zane, a worried look on his face. "Glad to see you, my friend, though I wish it were under better circumstances. How are you?" Zane clenched his jaw. "I'm angry. Cassie had spent the last 2 years overcoming her addictions and building a new life, only to be kidnapped now." Zane was anxious, but had an idea of where she might be. "You mean the EMS place near Ketchum?" Cal asked. He put a reassuring hand on Zane's shoulder. "My team's got it covered. We gathered all the information we could about entertainment management services, EMS, and your ex-father-in-law." In the Suburban, Cal introduced his team, including Sandy, Jada, Jack the lawyer, and Steve, the security lead. They drove in a convoy with a modified Land Rover and a Jeep towing ATVs. "How well prepared are we?" Zane asked, wary of what they might face. "Zane, we're ready for anything short of an army," Cal reassured. "These guys know what they're doing." Zane took a breath. "So, what have you heard about Cassie?" Cal replied, "I heard she got clean and left Albert, but it was just gossip, nothing confirmed. I figured her friends were keeping you in the loop. But tell me, do you believe she's really changed?" "She came to see Casey at Prescott and again in Casper. She's made real efforts to reconnect, and Carol believes in her too. I've been impressed. She's off drugs, and most importantly, she'd left Albert until now," Zane said, worry creeping into his voice. "I'm afraid he wants to use her for money again. EMS looks shady too, probably in on it." Jack, the lawyer, spoke up from the front seat. They are definitely shady. Legally, their contract with Cassandra is on very shaky ground. The signature they have is either a forgery or made when she wasn't in her right mind. It's not valid, but they want her to sign something legit soon. Jada added, "We've seen the messages between Albert and EMS's director, Donovan Talbot. They want to make her the queen of the rodeo fancy clothes, flashy photo shoots, even mentioning Lady Godiva-style publicity. They need her to willingly sign a contract and be a compliant model," Jack continued. "Albert thinks he can get her back on drugs to control her. He's already ordered them. Their plan is to break her down, get her to comply, and then use her however they want." Sandy chimed in. "They've done this before with others promising fame, but it ends in exploitation, sometimes even in adult films. I'm not sure why they're so interested in Cassie. She's attractive, but she doesn't fit their usual type." Zane's jaw clenched. Because she's vulnerable and they think they can make her vulnerable again. Zane shrugged, unable to explain Cassie's charm to someone with colorful hair and piercings. Cal added, "Sandy, if you were a man, you wouldn't ask that. Cassie has that girl-next-door charm, like Farrah Fawcett. She's naturally captivating." "How much longer till we get there?" Zane interrupted. "I'm worried they might take advantage of her, and it's almost dawn." Steve chuckled. "Since we knew we wouldn't get there till dawn, we had some locals create chaos at the compound a few times overnight. They've been scared enough not to act on anything yet." Steve pointed ahead as they began climbing a winding mountain road. "This is the road to the compound. Everyone get ready." Sandy replied, "We've been monitoring. Cassie's still in a room by herself while the others hide in their so-called safe room." "So, what's the plan?" Zane asked. Steve reassured him, "Zane, if you need to use your gear, we're in big trouble. We've got 5 professionals and 5 locals, plenty for the 8 guards they have. Honestly, they're not well trained, just a bunch of folks hiding from government control." Jack, the lawyer, spoke up. "Albert thinks he can control her, but we know better. There are major legal problems for him and EMS if they keep this up. I intend to solve that today." Zane smiled darkly. "We wouldn't need this legal talk if Albert were out of the picture, right?" Jack hesitated. "I didn't hear that, Zane. Just hypothetical, right?" "Yeah, just hypothetical," Zane replied. Steve chimed in with a grin. "Let's focus on getting Cassie and rewriting those papers. If it doesn't go smoothly, we'll take Cassie, and we might have a little accident afterward. These old buildings, you know." Zane's face hardened. "Look, I won't allow Albert to mess with her again. He ruined her, ruined our family. When I saw that smirk on his face as she left, I knew I should have done something back then. It's never too late to make it right." Cal squeezed Zane's shoulder. "For now, let's stick to the plan. We'll get everyone together, see how they respond, and take it from there." Zane nodded, arms crossed. He knew the package in his bag, the one he'd received back at the ranch, would definitely shake things up for Albert and the whole EMS team. They wouldn't know what hit them. Zane made quick work of the frightened guards, ordering them to drop their weapons and lie down. The red dots on their chests made them obey without resistance. Within minutes, Zane, Steve, and Cal approached the headquarters, forcing their way inside by shooting the door handle. They reached the safe room, Steve commanding those inside to open up. The door creaked open, and they stepped in. Zane's eyes locked on the 4 men and a woman huddled in a corner. "Where's Cassie?" he growled. The tallest man pointed to a side door. Zane didn't wait. He pushed through to find Cassie gagged, clothes disheveled, looking terrified. Seeing red, Zane shouted, "Step away from her!" He delivered a fierce slap to the man by her side, throwing him out of the room, where he landed in front of Albert, the very man responsible for all this. Steve moved in to help Cassie as Zane approached Albert, pressing his gun under his chin. "You've got 10 seconds to tell me what you gave her, or you'll regret it," Zane hissed. Albert stammered, "Just something to calm her down. She wanted it. After Cheyenne, she started using again, and I was just helping." Zane laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "You lying coward! Cassie has been sober since Cheyenne. I know because Casey talks to her every night, and I've listened in. You kidnapped her and drugged her to control her." Jody, the so-called nurse, mumbled something, and Zane nudged him sharply. "Speak up! What did you do to her?" All right. We took her at the rodeo and she fought back, so I gave her something just to calm her down. Maybe it was too much. I didn't mean harm, Jody pleaded. Zane kicked him again, his voice cold. You're just as guilty. The next lie will get someone seriously hurt. Nearby, a well-dressed man, Slick One, tried to regain control, saying, All this isn't necessary. We have a signed agreement. Let's discuss this like adults. Zane turned, pressing his gun against Slick's neck. Signed agreement? He sneered. You think that will hold up after what you've done? This signature was forged, coerced, or worse. I doubt a jury would take long to destroy your so-called contracts. Zane knew they were all in serious trouble, and it was time to finish this game. Cassie was getting out of here, and if they wanted to argue, he was ready for them. Cassie glared at her father, anger boiling over as she took a step forward and slapped him hard. You are the worst father ever! How could you treat your own daughter like this? It's shameful! Her voice trembled, but there was resolve in her eyes. Albert looked up, his expression wavering between shock and fear. Cassie took another step back, her hands clenched. She looked around the room at the EMS executives seated at the table, each appearing tense and unsure. Cal stepped forward. All right, let's get to the point. You all claim to have signed contracts from Cassie here, but given the circumstances under which she was taken, there's little chance any jury would see those as valid. He gestured towards Jack, who had the documents in hand. Our legal expert here is ready to go over those contracts. Jack spoke firmly, his eyes scanning the room. What we have here is a classic case of coercion. This is not just a civil issue. These actions could lead to criminal charges against all involved. He laid the contracts on the table, his eyes locking on Slick One. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Either you nullify these sham contracts and agree to leave Cassie alone, or we let this escalate through the courts, and believe me, it won't end well for you. Slick One swallowed hard, his face pale. He tried to muster a calm demeanor, but the tension was evident. We're willing to discuss a reasonable settlement, he said, glancing nervously between Zane and Cal. Zane leaned forward, his voice like ice. No settlement. You leave her alone permanently. There's no amount of money that could make up for what you've done to her. He glanced at Cassie, then back at the executives. I think it's time to end this nightmare. Slick 3 and the woman, clearly frightened, nodded quickly. Slick 2, still visibly shaking, stammered, We can void the contracts. Just, please, no more threats. Cal nodded at Steve, who signaled his team. Good choice. But understand, if any of you come near Cassie again, there will be no more discussions. We will be pressing every possible charge. Cassie, standing tall now, spoke with a calm resolve. I want it in writing, and I want it signed. No more claims over me, my image, or my career. And as for my father... She turned to look at Albert, who remained on the floor, defeated. You're done controlling me. I'm taking my life back. Albert started to say something, but Zane cut him off with a glare. She said enough. Your part in this is over. Jack quickly drafted a document nullifying the contracts, and Slick One signed with a trembling hand. It was done. The false agreements were voided, and they had no further claim on Cassie. As they prepared to leave, Cassie turned to Zane, her eyes full of gratitude and determination. Thank you for coming for me, she whispered. Zane nodded, offering her his arm again. Let's go home, Cassie, he said softly. Together, they walked out of the building, leaving the chaos behind. Cassie knew it wouldn't be easy to rebuild her life, but for the first time in years, she felt truly free. And with Zane and Casey waiting for her, she knew she had something worth fighting for. Cassie slapped her father again, her eyes blazing with anger. She stepped back to Zane's side, her gaze then turning to the EMS group at the table. Oh no, she said, her voice trembling. These are the people he chose to help me? They tried to force me into things I would never agree to. Zane shrugged, his voice calm but biting. They've got contracts. Cassie papers, they say, you signed in the car with your father. They claim you agreed to movies, photo shoots, and whatever else they wanted, but we know it's not true and we'll prove it. Cassie looked bewildered, shaking her head. I never signed anything like that. Not even at my worst would I have agreed to this. Exactly. You weren't in your right mind. We're going to get to the bottom of this. Jack here will help us sort things out, Zane said, nodding towards Cal's lawyer. Or we could just put these people out of business entirely. Your call. Cassie glanced at Zane, her eyes fierce. I'll listen to their offer, but if it's not right, then we go with your plan. Donovan Talbot, the man in the bright yellow polo, started to speak. He outlined a reduced Deal 2 films, 2 photo shoots, a lighter version of their original plan. Cassie cut him off sharply. No way! I want nothing to do with this. None of your papers are valid. Cal stepped in before Zane could react. Donovan, these papers need verification. Jack will compare them to the documents Cassie signed before a notary. Donovan began to hesitate. Well, we're kind of relying on her father's word now. Cassie looked over the documents Donovan handed her. She shook her head. These aren't mine. The signature isn't even close. It's a complete fake. Jack smiled. Would you testify to that in court if needed, Cassie? Absolutely, she replied, her confidence growing. Donovan tried to backtrack, feigning shock. It seems Mr. Collins has misled us. Zane couldn't help but laugh, and soon the room filled with laughter from Cal, Jack, and even Cassie. It was clear the truth was out, and these people had lost control. Then a woman in the room, Elizabeth Parker, spoke up. Miss Collins, perhaps there is another way forward. You have many fans across the tour, and with EMS, we could promote your brand, grow your career without you needing to ride as much. You could earn more and spend more time with your child. Cassie's face darkened. I was already planning for Caldwell to be my last rodeo, maybe forever. I've spoken with my mom, she wants me back home. And after seeing the lengths you all went to in trying to ruin my life, I am more determined than ever to stop you. Elizabeth tried to object, but Cassie's voice was unyielding. Don't bother denying it. My father wouldn't have kidnapped me without a plan with EMS. You're all complicit, and I won't let you get away with it. Cassie turned to Jack. I want to press charges, against all of them. Let's end this, once and for all. Jack nodded. Consider it done. Zane put an arm around Cassie for support as they walked out, leaving the stunned EMS executives behind. It was over. Finally, they could move forward free from the past. Zane raised his hand, cutting the woman off. Cleansing fire, he said, his voice steady, and she fell silent. Jack stepped in, a grin forming. You're barking up the wrong tree. Cassie granted Zane Reese power of attorney for her legal and business matters. She also signed a personal services contract with Mr. Reese and a management contract. So none of the deals she made with you are valid, not even the one involving Mr. Collins, Jack stated. Donovan and Cal helped Albert up from the floor as Jack made clear the inevitable downfall of EMS. He explained that the only decision left was when to proceed with the lawsuit, which would bring down the entire company and its executives. Cassie took it a step further. She got Donovan to sign a paper relinquishing any claims on her time or image. Then, with a sudden burst of fury, she slapped Donovan across the face. I hope I see you fail, she hissed, before turning away. The compound didn't stand a chance. It was burned to the ground along with the cars and phones of those involved. Albert, Jody, and the 4 executives were left to walk miles through the wilderness, eventually finding help, humbled and exhausted. Jack proceeded with the lawsuit as promised. The case attracted massive media coverage, and the jury awarded a large settlement, ultimately leading to the collapse of EMS. Cassie's bravery inspired other women to pursue lawsuits against powerful figures who had previously gone unchallenged. Cassie's reputation was restored and transformed. Once scorned on the rodeo circuit, she became a symbol of courage, earning admiration and respect. Back home, she focused on her daughter, their ranches, and supporting Zane and his friend Brad in their pursuit of a world championship in team roping. She cheered Zane on as he competed in tie-down calf roping, aiming for titles as an all-around cowboy. They maintained their lead through the fall. By December, Zane entered the Thomas Mack Center in Las Vegas as the favorite, and by mid-December, he was called the new champion by announcers on CBSSN TV. The Wrangler National Finals Rodeo buzzed with excitement. Zane was poised to win not only the team roping title, but also the title of all-around cowboy. He was young, single, confident, attractive, and humble, though he carried a touch of pride. Despite his connection to Cassie, Zane made it clear that discussing their marriage was off-limits. He had no issue talking about her rodeo achievements or her courage in standing against corruption, but their personal relationship remained private. The attention from sponsors, interviews, and appearances alongside legends like George Harvey and his family was overwhelming. Temptations surrounded them, but Zayn remained focused, determined to finish what he and Cassie had both fought so hard for. Here's a shorter version that keeps the core of the story intact while streamlining the details. Zayn and Brad were gaining fame and praise throughout the rodeo, receiving attention from fans and admirers alike. Brad, committed to his marriage, attended events but always returned to his trailer, earning respect for his dedication. Zayn, being single, faced more temptation, particularly during exclusive parties where many women pursued him boldly. As the days passed, Zayn's confidence and success grew, along with the temptations. By the 5th day, after winning multiple rounds, he felt the pull of the admiration he received. One late night, tired and with some whiskey in his system, he found himself with Alina, a striking Ukrainian model. They left a party together for her penthouse. Once in her suite, things escalated quickly. Alina's beauty and enthusiasm drew Zayn in. They shared moments of passion, moving together naturally, exploring their connection. She was playful and he responded with care, their interaction growing more intense and satisfying as they progressed. Their night together was filled with excitement, warmth, and an undeniable connection. They shifted comfortably, savoring each other's presence and embracing the adventure of it all. When it was over, they lay side by side, sharing contented smiles that expressed their mutual satisfaction. Alina's charm was undeniable, and their chemistry was electric. After their shared moment, she rested on top of him, her smile radiating satisfaction. "You cowboys have your own secrets," she said, her words capturing the thrill of the night. This version captures the key elements of the scene, focusing on the emotions and actions without unnecessary elaboration. Zayn had a thrilling night with Alina, but as the morning came, he realized it was all superficial. She wanted him to stay, but he felt the need to leave. Before departing, Zayn discovered a hidden chair in her room, and Alina admitted her husband had been there, watching them. Shocked, Zayn decided to end the interaction quickly and head back to his trailer, leaving behind the unsettling encounter. Later that night, Zayn kept himself focused, avoiding distractions and sticking mostly to water at events. The championships were in sight, and he had to stay clear-headed. Carol joined the later rounds in Vegas to support Brad and Zayn, leaving Cassie behind to care for the girls. Despite Carol's encouragement, Cassie opted to stay out of the spotlight, not wanting to resurface old stories about her and Zayn. She was more interested in quietly celebrating Zayn's success from afar. With Carol's support, Zayn regained his focus. By the end, they had earned $11,833, and Zayn was crowned the all-around cowboy with a lead of $7,389. Celebrating after the show was fun but subdued. They still had to maintain their public appearances, which left them exhausted. The next morning, Zayn made his way back to his horses, feeding them while being interviewed by Dylan Dreyer for the Today Show. Unlike other interviews, Zayn enjoyed talking to Dylan. She was knowledgeable and genuine, which he appreciated. The spotlight shone even brighter on Zayn now, and navigating fame became more complicated. Later, Zayn and Brad flew to Los Angeles for an appearance on Late Night with Stephen Colbert. Although Colbert didn't know much about rodeo, his humor made the interview fun, leaving Zayn and Brad in good spirits as they laughed off stage. After a whirlwind of interviews and appearances, their first set of commitments was finally behind them. Zayn felt ready to return to a more grounded life, focusing on the important things: family, friends, and keeping his feet firmly planted in the world he knew best. Zayn and Brad headed home after feeding the horses, driving long hours through the desert. After a quick nap in New Mexico and some chorizo and egg tacos, they continued their journey, parting ways as they neared their respective ranches. When Zayn reached his ranch, he saw his family on the porch. Casey ran to greet him as soon as she heard his truck, and Zayn scooped her up, spinning her around with joy. He hugged his parents and Sue, and when he looked at Cassie, he smiled and asked for a hug, which she gladly gave, holding him just a bit longer than the others. They thanked Cassie and the grandparents for watching over Casey. Sue asked about her ex-husband, but Zayn only hinted at his whereabouts, leaving some tension in the air. Little Casey, overhearing, declared, "He took my mommy away, but mommy is home now and promised she won't leave again." Cassie nodded, touched, and reassured her daughter she was there to stay. Zane, however, remained quietly concerned, knowing Cassie's tour commitments weren't over. They began unloading the horses. Casey took charge of Suds, her father's giant but gentle horse. She led him to the corral with confidence, showing a bond beyond her years. The grandparents watched a bit nervously, but they couldn't deny her natural ease around the animals. Cassie stood back, filled with a mix of pride and regret. She's been her daddy's girl from day one, and Zane's the best with horses. But I feel like I pushed her to grow up too soon by leaving. Her voice trembled. Zane's mom comforted her, assuring her she was a great mom too. The family shared their understanding and support. Later, they all gathered at Elle's house, enjoying a hearty meal and good conversation, celebrating the return of the cowboys and the closeness of family once more. After dessert, Cassie turned to Zane. "Did you hear what the announcer said about you and your horses?" Zane shook his head, and Carol excitedly jumped in. "They were impressed, Zane. They talked about how you train challenging horses and turn them into champions. They even wondered if you could do the same with Red's offspring." Cassie smiled. "They didn't mention me at all, did they?" she said teasingly. Zane chuckled. "Goldie's success is as much about her rider as it is about training, but I know our teamwork brought her there." Zane paused, gathering his thoughts. "I don't want to spoil the mood, but there's something important we need to discuss. I need everyone's input." His dad spoke up. "You mean your plans for the rodeo events in Fort Worth, San Antonio, Houston, and Austin, right?" He nodded at Cassie, Brad, and Carol. "We've talked, and it's up to you all to decide. We'll help where we can, but the responsibility falls on you." Carol was straightforward. "I have a job offer to teach full-time, and I want to accept it. The girls love their school, and it's important for their routine." Cassie took a breath. "Zane, I'm not going back to rodeo. Lindsay and I agreed she could borrow Goldie for the season. My priority is being a mother to Casey. I'm here for our daughter, and I'll manage with support from Sue, David, Mom, and Carol. We'll need to talk about the ranch and hiring some help, though." Zane looked around, feeling a mix of emotions. "So, you two have it all figured out?" He turned to Brad. "What about you?" Brad nodded. "Carol and I have talked it over. I want to give it one more shot, then step back. We'll make it work with our sponsors and keep in touch." Just then, Casey ran in, excitedly grabbing Cassie's hand. "Mom, you have to see the fort we built. Aunt Carol, come too." Zane watched, feeling a pang of sadness. Once he would have been part of that excitement. Was he making the right choice, chasing another year on tour? Later that night, Casey chose to stay with Zane, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace having her nearby. The next day, Cassie and Zane talked while Casey played with her grandparents. They discussed their roles and responsibilities, and Cassie surprised him by cautioning about the risks that come with fame, making him realize how much she had changed and how much was at stake. Cassie spoke calmly. "People like Alina and her husband will always be around, Zane. You have a spotless reputation, and something like that could easily become a scandal." Zane nearly asked how she knew, but it was obvious she still had friends on the tour. He considered apologizing, but why should he? They weren't married. Still, maybe he should. He stayed silent. Cassie continued, "You're older and wiser now, but there are still risks out there. I know that better than anyone. I never want Casey to think badly of her father like I fear she might think of me one day." They moved on to discuss the logistics of caring for Casey, managing the farm, and dealing with the cattle and horses. Cassie was willing to take on most of the responsibilities at home while Zane stayed on the road. "I'll be handling what you did for 4 years, except without the whole cheating wife part," Cassie joked lightly. Zane walked up to her, took her arms gently, and said, "I don't want to hear you talk like that again. You've changed, and you've worked hard for the last 2 years. You're taking on even more now, giving up your dream to be here. You deserve nothing but respect for that." Tears filled her eyes, but she managed a nod. "My dream has changed, Zane. All I want now is to be a good mother to our daughter, like you are to her." The next day, they all loaded into 2 SUVs for a Christmas shopping trip to San Marcos. They spent the day walking, eating, and browsing stores. After a long day, they stopped for dinner at Grin's, sharing appetizers and enjoying ribeye and chicken fried steaks. They stayed at Embassy Suites that night, and the next day they explored the Texas State Campus, shopped in Austin, and visited the Bob Bullock Texas History Museum. There, Zane unexpectedly ran into an NBC reporter covering an exhibit. She persuaded them to do a segment, and soon the entire group, Zane, Cassie, Brad, Carol, the kids, and grandparents, was on camera for almost half an hour. As they finished, Casey turned to Zane. "Daddy, that lady was flirting with you," she said, her eyes wide with realization. Zane chuckled, brushing it off. Later, Zane booked rooms at the ATT Hotel and Conference Center on the University of Texas campus. He promised the kids a visit to the Natural History Museum to see dinosaurs and said he'd buy them Longhorn gear at the Coop. He led everyone on a tour of the campus, pointing out landmarks, the Littlefield Fountain, the dorm he stayed in for Boys State, the Tower. He talked about his love for the Longhorns and his plans to keep taking online classes, even if it would take him 5 more years to finish. He enjoyed learning for its own sake, and it gave him a way to grow beyond rodeo despite the long road ahead. Zane was starting to feel more confident about investments, even though he still leaned on Cal and his advisors. The family enjoyed their visit to the Natural History Museum, but the highlight was the tour of Darrell K. Royal Texas Memorial Stadium. They had only intended to peek through the fence, but fate intervened when a coach recognized Zane. The coach turned out to be a rodeo fan, and soon enough, they were given a full tour, meeting head coach Tom Herman and the rest of the staff. "Coaches, you're in the presence of legends. Cassandra, 3-time world champion barrel racer, and Brad and Zane, recent world champions in team roping, with Zane also winning calf roping and all-around cowboy," the coach said. Zane praised the Longhorns for their victory over the Sooners, and Coach Herman surprised them all with tickets to the Sugar Bowl and sideline passes for Zane and Brad. "I think you two can handle it among the big players," Coach Herman joked. As they walked away, Cassie mused, "Watch the ball drop at home, or celebrate New Year's in New Orleans. Watching fireworks over the Mississippi? Tough call." The choice was clear, and Cassie and Carol dove into the challenging task of booking hotels. An hour later, Carol grinned. "Good thing you guys won all that money. 4 Seasons suites by the river. Plane tickets and rental SUVs cost a fortune. It was either that or sleep under a bridge." On December 29th at 4:30 a.m., they took off for New Orleans, arriving 2 days before the game since flights were limited. Once there, they had beignets at Café du Monde, rode the streetcars to Tulane University, and admired the Victorian homes along St. Charles. They also visited City Park, toured the New Orleans Museum of Art, and enjoyed the beautiful grounds. The 1-2 Museum was a highlight, with David sharing stories about his father, a veteran of D-Day. Later, they had dinner at Drago's seafood restaurant, with charbroiled oysters stealing the show. Full and happy, they strolled back to the 4 Seasons, where they checked into their top-floor suites with a stunning view of the city. Before bedtime, they made plans for the next day. Jackson Square and the French Quarter awaited them. The women decided on a plantation tour, while the men and kids opted for a paddleboat ride down the river. They were glad they had come early to New Orleans. In Zane's suite, Elle claimed the smaller room, leaving Casey, Cassie, and Zane to share the king bed. Cassie seemed determined to make it work, leaving Zane to shrug and settle in. After the women showered and got ready, Zane joined them in bed, kissing Casey on the cheek. She hugged him, smiling. "Best day ever, and now I get to sleep with both of you." The next day began with a hearty breakfast before visiting plantations. They started at Destrehan, then toured San Francisco Whitney House with its exhibit on slavery, and Oak Alley, awed by its grand entrance. A late lunch at Huma House introduced them to traditional dishes like bread pudding, and they picked up souvenirs afterward, joking about needing to ship them home. Throughout the day, Cassie stayed close to Zane, which he didn't mind. She looked great, and he noticed how others, especially some college guys, were eyeing her too. That evening, they explored the French Quarter, enjoyed dinner at Napoleon House, and wandered down Royal and Bourbon streets, absorbing the lively atmosphere. The next day, they boarded a paddle wheeler for a Mississippi River tour to the Battle of New Orleans site. The river was bustling, and the men discussed economics, musing on the irony of exporting scrap metal to China only to buy it back as finished products. Their guide brought history to life at the battlefield, describing the Scots leading the British charge against American defenses. The scene was vivid American troops shielded by cotton bales, unleashing cannon and rifle fire against the advancing Scots. Despite their bravery, the British faced overwhelming losses, and Zane found himself reflecting on the futility of it all. It was a great American victory, but the guide conveyed empathy for the fallen soldiers. In the afternoon, they focused on the kids, visiting Audubon Park and Zoo, which delighted them with everything from insects to elephants. As evening approached and it was New Year's Eve, they enjoyed dinner at Acme Oyster House before returning to the hotel to prepare for the night's festivities. Here's the revised version with a tighter focus and shorter length. The kids rested before the fireworks at 11 p.m. Meanwhile, Zane, Cassie, Brad, and Carol tried their luck at Harrah's Casino, returning by 10 p.m. They opted to walk to the river for the fireworks, which were spectacular. At midnight, Zane shared a brief but special kiss with a woman beside him. Despite the day's excitement, sleep didn't come easily. The next day, they visited the Audubon Butterfly Center and explored riverfront shops. A streetcar took them to Café du Monde in Jackson Square, where the women bought paintings. They also took a haunted buggy tour of the French Quarter, piquing their interest in returning for a haunted pub tour someday. With game time approaching, they returned to rest and get ready. For the Sugar Bowl, everyone donned Texas Longhorn color skids and grandparents wore sweatshirts, while Brad and Zane, who had sideline passes, wore jeans, white UT shirts, burnt orange jackets, cowboy hats, and fancy boots. Cassie and Carol stunned in burnt orange dresses and matching Longhorn boots, drawing cheers and compliments from the crowd. Zane felt proud but uneasy about the attention, though the kids seemed oblivious. Being on the sideline at the Superdome was an exhilarating experience for Zane. Texas dominated, leading 207 at halftime and eventually winning 28-21. During the game, Zane overheard a Georgia player exclaim about the unexpected toughness of the Longhorns, which fueled his pride in the Big 12. After the third quarter, Zane and Brad were introduced by the announcer, much to the delight of the crowd and their sponsors. Post-game, their families joined them on the field to celebrate. The TV crew briefly introduced Cassie as Zane's wife, noting her world championships. Zane put his arm around her, and she leaned into him. He let her stay close long after the spotlight moved away. Zane and Brad started their rodeo season with strong wins in Denver, followed by stops in Fort Worth, San Antonio, Houston, and Austin, leaving Texas with excellent standings. They balanced their time at the ranch, video calls with family, and maintaining close contact through messages. Zane spoke with his parents and Sue weekly, and with Cassie even more frequently. Their conversations, centered on work and family, gradually brought them closer, blending business and personal matters seamlessly. Here's the condensed version that maintains the core events and message. Despite the video calls, Zane felt lonely and missed his daughter. They worked hard until an April break and then again in June, reuniting with Carol, Cassie, and the girls for rodeos around the 4th of July and the Calgary Stampede. Cheyenne brought more wins and fun, and Zane convinced Cassie to stay for the Caldwell Night Rodeo, encouraging her to replace bad memories with better ones. Their first night in Caldwell, they had a big sing-along with other families and rodeo friends. Lindsay brought young barrel racers, adding more energy to the gathering. Zane mixed in some classic Western songs and red dirt music, which brought a fresh feeling to the group. They ended the night with heartfelt hymns, and Zane finished by playing The Dance before everyone returned to their trailers. Cassie had already taken Casey inside to sleep. When Zane went in, he found them cuddled on his bed, so he took a couple of pictures and settled into Cassie's bunk, inhaling her scent. He thought about the future and planned to share news with Casey in the morning. Cassie woke early, took Casey out for breakfast, and let Zane rest. Later, they had breakfast together, and Cassie mentioned that Casey would spend the day with the Simpson girls. She had a request for Zaneshi wanted to visit the place where she had once been held. They drove out to the site, now just ruins after the fire, and walked around in silence. "How could my father do this to me?" Cassie asked, her voice strained. She revealed she had been there twice, once to discuss a TV deal where her father let her drink, which led to an awful situation. Her hatred for Donovan was strong, but her resentment for her father ran even deeper. Zane rubbed her back gently, offering comfort. You know, Donovan's in prison now. He and his team admitted to harassment and are facing the consequences. From what I hear, they're learning respect from the other side. Cassie's civil case had sparked many others, leading to the shutdown of EMS. There were others involved, and they acted boldly while breaking laws and hurting people, Zane said. He continued, Your dad, Albert, is now working at a hardware store in Boise. I visited him after talking to James, your former caregiver. James has a low pain threshold, so he shared some hard truths. Albert had planned to use you to make money. He was already speaking with EMS and other companies about getting you into TV, modeling, and film. They saw you as the perfect spokesperson, young, beautiful, and single. Being married with a child didn't fit that narrative. He paused. James said Albert got you drinking, then on designer drugs, and eventually tried cocaine. He gave you substances to break your will and control your choices. He even spread lies about me to separate you from your family. It was all about the money. Cassie seemed doubtful, but Zane cut in. Albert even used drugs from South America Onis, known to make people lose their free will. He used those to manipulate you into situations for his benefit. Cassie stood still, staring at the ruins. She asked, Why did they tell you all this? Did you have to make them? Zane nodded. Yes, and they paid for what they did. Albert is now in a wheelchair. Good, she said quietly. On the drive back, Cassie finally spoke. Why do you still help me, Zane? Why have you let me back into your life and our daughters? I don't deserve this. Zane looked over. I can't fully forgive you because you haven't forgiven yourself. You shine when you're with Casey. But with me, you're guarded, like you're expecting to be hurt again. Why is that? Cassie sighed. I don't deserve kindness or forgiveness. I have a long way to go. Cassie, forgiveness isn't something you earn, it's given freely. Look into grace. Read about John Wesley's teachings. We can talk more after. Cassie nodded. I've been seeing a psychologist since the start of the year every week. I also attend a support group in Fredericksburg once a month. My guide has been sober for 22 years, and she helps me understand what could happen if I go back to my old ways. I'm trying to thrive, not just survive. Zane smiled. I'm glad to hear that. Thriving is what you deserve. The Caldwell Night Rodeo wasn't their best. Zane lost some of his lead in tie-down, but considering the circumstances, they left feeling almost like winners. As they cruised down the highway, Cassie sat relaxed, her feet tucked under her, and Zane couldn't help but admire her calm expression. After a while, he asked, You look happy today, Cassie. Want to talk about it? She glanced at their daughter playing on her iPad and spoke softly. I've been reflecting on my mistakes. My dad made everything sound easy. Just leave Casey with you, my mom, and your parents, while I toured full-time. He promised fame, money, and a great life. I was naive to believe him. She continued, My counselor says it's natural to trust your father. But my dad lied, and I can't undo what I did that year. I know now the consequence is losing you as a partner no matter how much I love you now or how I've matured. But I've made amends with my mom and Casey has forgiven me. I'll keep showing that I deserve their love, and I want to be the best mom for Casey. Zane was silent, and Cassie turned to look out the window, stretching her legs. He processed her words as they traveled through Utah. They enjoyed lunch in Provo and decided to spend the night in Durango. Cassie made arrangements for a hotel, a stable for the horses, and rented an SUV. When they arrived, she got the car while Zane took care of the horses. After dinner, they relaxed by the motel's heated pool. As the kids played, Carol grew serious. With school starting soon, the kids and I can't travel with you anymore. Cassie and I think you should hire drivers for the tour finale in Puyallup. If Cassie goes, she can share the driving with Zane, but Brad will need someone. Brad nodded, adding, We're all tired, including the horses. Joe, Ricky, or Caleb might catch up if they push hard, but for now, let's rest and take it one event at a time. With fresh horses and clear heads, we'll do better at the finale, Brad said. We thought about getting drivers, but hadn't considered Cassie. Would you come with us? Cassie looked at Zane before answering. Do you want me to go? We have time to think it over, Zane replied. I figured you'd stay with Casey since summer break is ending. Then that's what I'll do, Cassie said, a hint of regret in her eyes. Just then, Casey, Stacy, and Sammy came running over, brochures in hand. Mommy, Daddy, can we stay here tomorrow? There's so much fun stuff, a train ride and a mountain town. The parents exchanged glances and Carol spoke up. I could use a couple of days to relax before school starts. I'm with the girls, let's stay. They agreed on taking the steam train to Silverton the next day, giving them a day of rest and fun. The girls were so excited that they decided to sleep together that night, which meant Zane would be sharing the room with Cassie. Zane considered the situation. It wasn't the first time they had shared a space, but without Casey it felt different. Still, they were adults, just co-parents. What harm could there be? Later that night, Zane settled into bed in his pajamas. Cassie emerged from the bathroom in a long nightdress, her damp hair framing her face. She looked beautiful, and Zane tried to ignore the emotions that surfaced. They wished each other good night and went to sleep. A few hours later, a fierce storm rolled in, lightning flashing and thunder rumbling loudly. Zane was glad the horses were safe and hoped their trucks were fine. Amidst the storm, he thought he heard a faint sound. Suddenly, lightning struck close by, and a loud clap of thunder made Cassie cry out. Are you okay? Zane called. Cassie peeked from under her covers. I hate storms, especially lightning. Can I come lie next to you? It helps if someone's nearby. Sure, he replied. Cassie climbed into his bed, curling close to him. She seemed to shake a little. One night in Wyoming, my dad almost got us hurt during a storm like this, she whispered. She described a night when her dad and a stranger under the influence drove into a terrible storm. She begged them to turn back as lightning struck a tree nearby, sending flaming branches toward their car. The men laughed it off, but she had been terrified. As she finished, Zane listened quietly, his arm instinctively around her. It was a moment of vulnerability, and he realized how much Cassie had been through. He pulled her a little closer, reassuring her. You're safe now, he said softly. She stayed close, and eventually, they both drifted off to sleep, comforted by each other's presence. The storm calmed, but once in her room, Cassie locked and chained the door. The driver and his friend stayed outside, complaining, until she called for help, and they were told to leave. Back in Zane's bed, Cassie nestled closer, her voice shaky. I'm really scared. Can you hold me and maybe talk to distract me? Zane hesitated, then wrapped his arms around her, reminding himself this was just about comfort. She settled against him, her breathing slowing, her familiar scent, her leg resting on his, everything felt intimate. She stirred slightly, sensing the effect she had on him. Well, that certainly is distracting. Thanks, she whispered, her tone playful. The tension was undeniable, but Zane tried to stay calm. When she looked into his eyes, Zane kissed her with intensity, and for a moment Cassie let herself be lost in it. She knew she was crossing a line, but couldn't help it. This was Zane. He pulled away. Take off your dress, he said, his voice commanding. She hesitated, but began to lift her top. When he asked her to remove his shorts, she froze. Zane, I made a vow, she said, her voice trembling. I promised I wouldn't be with anyone again until I was married. Zane laughed, laying back with disbelief. Seriously? You come over here scared of the storm, get this close, and now you're talking about a vow of abstinence? He scoffed. Suddenly the phone rang. Zane answered. Daddy, is Mommy okay? Casey's voice asked. She's scared of storms. Should I come stay with her? Zane reassured their daughter while Cassie turned away, pulling her nightdress back on, feeling crushed. She climbed into her bed, facing away from him. How could Zane think so little of her? She'd changed, become a better mother and co-parent, but he still seemed to see her as the person she used to be. As the realization set in, her sadness turned to anger. She felt used, like Zane still saw her as vulnerable, someone to exploit just like others had before. He claimed to understand her past, but in this moment, he made her feel just as powerless as she had been back then. Cassie refused to blame everything on her father or her youth. Her mother had taught her to resist temptations. But she couldn't understand why Zane urged her to forgive herself if he was treating her this way. All she wanted was comfort during the storm. As she turned to express her feelings, Zane slid under the covers beside her. She was already on her elbow when she saw his remorseful face. "I'm sorry," Zane began. Cassie glared, ready to let him know how she felt. "You're right to be angry." Zane sighed. "I misunderstood what you meant. I thought you wanted to be close." Cassie looked away, her voice trembling. "I've made many mistakes, but I wanted to be a good mother and partner. My dad lied to me, used drugs to control me, and tried to exploit me for money. I've been seeing a counselor and working hard to thrive." Zane softened. "I can't fully forgive you because you haven't forgiven yourself. You shine with Casey, but with me you seem closed off. Why is that?" Cassie replied, "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I have a long way to go." "Grace isn't something you earn," Zane said. "You deserve to thrive." That night the phone rang. Casey asked if Mommy was okay during the storm. Zane reassured her while Cassie quickly dressed, feeling hurt and used. She lay in bed realizing Zane still saw her as the girl who left, not the changed woman she had become. Anger replaced her sadness as she felt exploited once more. Zane noticed the adults watching a blushing Cassie, who clearly remembered the night before. The girls were excited about the train ride, and Carol whispered to Cassie, "We need to talk after breakfast." Cassie, turning redder, looked down while Zane quietly remarked, "You're going to be disappointed, Carol." The steam train was impressive, and even in August, the jackets their moms insisted on came in handy. The views were breathtaking, and they snapped hundreds of photos. In Silverton, the girls embraced the touristy vibe. Zane and Brad were roped into a street show, donning long coats and toy guns. The heroes won, and the bad guys were caught in a fun, dramatic chase. At the saloon, they enjoyed a show. Carol joined a magic trick while Cassie refused to be hypnotized, insisting, "My therapist uses hypnosis, and I know how risky it can be." Teased afterward, she stayed firm, saying, "I'm not letting someone like him in my head." They left Silverton by 2 o'clock with the kids napping on the drive back to Durango. After a satisfying dinner at Ken and Sue's, they explored downtown before returning to the hotel for a swim. Later, by the pool, Brad remarked how lucky they were to have such beautiful wives, while Zane teased him for being tipsy. Cassie, graceful as she exited the pool, attracted attention with playful poses, drawing laughter when Carol joined in on the fun. Cassie then asked Zane, "So, do you still think I'm too skinny, or is it just Carol?" Zane responded by pulling her onto his lap and tickling her, sparking laughter until the girls jumped in to rescue her. It had been an unforgettable day, capped with the best tour they'd ever taken at Mesa Verde. As they descended into the sacred kiva, they felt the presence of history and spirit. The ancient Puebloan buildings, abandoned in the late 1200s due to drought, were a testament to the resilience of those who had lived there. Over lunch, Zane captivated everyone with stories about the Anasazi, the ancient ones who built cliffside homes in the Southwest. His audience grew as he spoke, and he earned applause when he finished. At the Four Corners Monument, the women bought silver and turquoise jewelry from Native American artisans. Later, Cassie discovered a pair of knee-high beaded boots on her bed in Durango, a gift from Zane after she hesitated to buy them. She smiled knowingly, teasing him, but he played innocent. That evening, after a fun dinner and entertaining show by the Bar D Wranglers, the group headed back to the hotel for one last swim. The men were coaxed into joining the women in the pool, where splash fights erupted. Cassie and Carol challenged each other, and Zane playfully helped Cassie fend off her friends. Later, when Casey slept in their room, her presence kept the mood light, even as Cassie kissed Zane goodnight. He turned away, trying to sleep, as their playful connection deepened. The next day, the men prepared the horses while the women shopped one last time. During the drive home, Zane noticed Cassie smiling secretively, but she brushed off his curiosity. They shifted their conversation to plans for the coming weeks. On the long drive back through New Mexico and Texas, Zane and Cassie had one of their longest talks in years, discussing her joining him for the finale in Washington and how to make the most of their time together. Zane still struggled to fully trust her, but the tension had eased. Cassie, too, had let go of some of her guilt, focusing on the present as they enjoyed each other's company in a quiet, reflective way. 2 weeks later, Cassie surprised Zane by signing them up for a team roping event in Stephenville. While Zane was caught off guard by the decision, he agreed they needed the practice. On the drive, Brad asked Zane if things were changing between him and Cassie, noticing how much time they spent together. Zane replied simply, "We're still co-parents and work together at the ranch." Zane explained to Brad that Cassie's mom invited them for dinner most nights unless Cassie had a counseling session, and while she cooked better than him, the meals were mainly because Casey was around. Frustrated, Brad pressed further. "What about your personal life? Are things improving between you two?" Zane admitted they were getting along, focused on co-parenting and moving past old issues. But Brad pushed, "We can all see Cassie's in love with you. You don't give her hope. Do you doubt she's changed?" Zane hesitated, explaining that while he cared for Cassie and admired her, trust was harder to rebuild. He still feared the possibility of another crash landing the heartbreak and uncertainty from her past struggles with addiction. "She's changed," Zane acknowledged. "But how can I be sure it'll last? Carol has been loyal all along, Cassie hasn't." Brad reminded him that Cassie had made sacrifices, choosing to stay close even without the promise of reconciliation. He believed she was committed to protecting Zane and Casey now, and Brad urged Zane to see that love was still there. "If you don't give her another chance, you'll lose something important for yourself, for her, and for Casey. You love her, Zane, whether you admit it or not." Zane paused, deep in thought, but shifted focus to the competition. They competed fiercely, proving they were still champions and winning new buckles and prize money. The excitement of the day couldn't distract Zane, though, who remained quiet and reflective during the drive home. At the dinner that evening, Brad noticed Zane watching Cassie, a quiet curiosity in his eyes. There was polite conversation but underlying tension between them, as if something was left unsaid. The next morning, Zane's parents invited him over for coffee, and as he sat down, he asked, "So, what's going on?" Zane's parents exchanged looks before his mom began. "We don't want to meddle, but this involves all of us, Sue, Casey, everyone." Zane leaned in, listening. His mom continued, "You and Cassie married too young, and though we warned you, neither of you listened. Cassie had a lot of growing up to do, especially as an only child. With you, she was learning to see beyond herself, but Albert's influence pulled her off course. She made choices that hurt you and Casey, and that's why you're hesitant now." She paused, then added, "But she's not that selfish girl anymore. She's a mature woman who loves her daughter and is committed to her family. We don't want you to avoid love out of fear. It's clear as day. You still love her, and everyone can see it." Zane looked down, thinking, "You're right, Mom. I never stopped loving her, but is that enough? What if she hurts us again? What about Casey?" His dad jumped in. "Casey would be hurt if Cassie left now, married or not. That chance has passed, but I'd bet my life she won't make the same mistakes. You just have to decide whether to move forward or stay stuck. That's no way to live." His mom added, "Cassie's put her life on pause to fix what she broke, but eventually she'll want a husband and maybe more kids. The question is, will that be with you?" Later, while riding with Cassie, Zane asked, "What about Casey if you come with us to Washington?" "She'll stay with Mom and Carol. She'll be fine." Zane pressed, "Why spend 31 hours on the road with us?" Cassie smiled. "I could say I want to see the finale or help with the driving, and both would be true. But really, I enjoy being with you and miss you when you're gone." Zane grinned. "Welcome aboard. We leave early and it won't be easy, but I'm glad you're coming." As they rode, Zane couldn't help but think how beautiful she looked, even more so than when they first met. Cassie tried to avoid looking at Zane, afraid her feelings would show, but she could sense his admiration. It stirred something in her, though she brushed it off, blaming the dampness of her jeans from the saddle. The trip with Zane and Brad could have been tough, but Cassie kept things light and cheerful. They stayed overnight in Ogden, Utah, with Cassie and Zane sharing a bed, though they stayed on their own sides, unsure if it was the right time for more. In Tacoma, they attended a sponsor event at the upscale Hotel Murano. Dressed in their finest Western suits, Zane and Brad accompanied Cassie, who stunned in a black sequined dress. As they entered, the room fell silent before buzzing with excitement. Jokingly, they teased each other, but it was clear the crowd's attention was on Cassie. Carlton Smith, their host, greeted them, especially Cassie, with flattering attention. Zane, feeling a pang of jealousy, wondered if this glamorous world was what Cassie had embraced during their time apart. As she mingled, Zane admired her from across the room, marveling at her transformation into a poised, sophisticated woman. While keeping an eye on her, Zane noticed a man guiding Cassie out of the room by her elbow, a sight that made him uneasy. He tried to follow, but was delayed by a sponsor. When he finally broke free, he searched for Cassie down the hall, questioning why it bothered him so much. After all, they didn't have an agreement, just their connection through Casey. Zane bumped into Paul, an old friend, who warned him, "That guy, Dale, took Cassie into a room and she looked uncomfortable. I don't think she wants to be there with him." Zane moved to the door, hearing raised voices inside. He cracked it open, catching the tail end of their argument. "Come on, you remember how much fun we had?" "Dale, Zane's busy with sponsors. We have time to enjoy ourselves," Dale said, pushing Cassie. Cassie retorted, "Do you remember how I found God? I woke up after that night, saw you, and realized I'd hit rock bottom. That was my wake-up call. I cleaned up, went to church, and stayed away from people like you. I'm not spending time with you today or ever again." Dale tried to charm her. "Come on, Cassie, we had fun. You look even better now, and I can offer more than I did back then." Cassie, unfazed, replied, "Maybe Zane won't take me back, but he treats me and Casey better than I deserve. That's enough for me. Now let's head back." Dale persisted. "Just give me an hour and you'll change your mind." Cassie shot back, "I don't remember anything good about you. Let me go or I'll scream." Dale grew menacing. "You'll regret this." Cassie stood her ground. "No, you'll be icing those injuries tomorrow. Goodbye, Dale." Zane, listening at the door, heard the slap and rushed in just as Cassie emerged, defiant. "I see I shouldn't make you mad, Cassie," he joked. "He's regretting those words now." She smiled but challenged, "How long have you been listening?" "Long enough to know he's not the best you ever had." Cassie teased, "I don't remember anything with him. So Zane, are you too proud to take me back?" Zane stepped into the room, looked down at Dale, and said, "If you touch her again, you'll regret it. Any pictures or videos of her show up, you're responsible." He nudged Dale with his boot. "Consider that a warning." Cassie smiled as Zane pulled her close and kissed her softly. They shared a tender moment before Dale stumbled past them, mumbling. Zane shut the door and Cassie pulled him in for another kiss. When they paused, she asked, "So, are you okay with being seen with me now, or is this just casual?" Zane replied, "I respect your promises, especially those made to me." Cassie smiled warmly. "I want to be with the person I made those promises to. Are you ready to let me back into your life as your girlfriend, maybe more?" "Let's start with girlfriend," Zane said, smiling. They kissed again before Cassie freshened up. As they returned to the party, Zane noticed his old friend Paul wink, and others smiled in approval. In the ballroom, Brad and Cal shared a high five, and Zane knew they were headed towards something good. After greeting Cal, Zane and Cassie were introduced to Thomas Evans, the Coastal COO, who greeted them warmly. He jokingly asked, "Do we have a rodeo queen to sponsor now?" Cassie laughed and replied, "Not yet, but I'm working on it," leaning playfully against Zane. Zane joked about getting a new trailer, and despite Brad's concerns about Zane's focus, they performed well, increasing their chances for the finals in Las Vegas. Wherever they went, Cassie and Zane were welcomed as a couple, and no one mentioned her past. Their return to Texas was filled with joy. When they arrived, Casey and the girls raced over to greet them. Cassie stepped out of the truck into Zane's arms, and they spun around, smiling at their daughter's excitement. Casey asked, "Are you back together?" Zane responded, "Right now she's your mom and my girlfriend." Cassie teased, "When did that happen?" And Zane joked that it became official after she made his favorite breakfast. Cassie continued staying at her mom's while Zane stayed at his, but by the third day, Zane invited her on a special outing. He suggested she wear something nice yet casual, and she chose a denim dress she had designed, adding a playful touch by leaving a few snaps open and pairing it with the boots he had given her. Zane picked her up in his Mule 4X4, carrying a picnic basket and cooler. As they traveled down a rocky path toward the river, Cassie's excitement grew. They arrived at a peaceful, grassy area by the Llano River, surrounded by tall pecan trees and a small waterfall. It was the perfect picnic spot. Zane spread out the blanket and served fried chicken, biscuits, coleslaw, and Dr. Pepper. Cassie, still curious, asked, "Why are we here, Zane?" He smiled and said, "It's a lovely day, so I thought I'd invite my best girl." With that, they enjoyed their picnic, and Cassie began to relax, knowing Zane was ready to take the next step. Cassie kept glancing at Zane, frustrated by his avoidance. "I don't want dessert. I want to know why we're here." Zane played dumb. "Where are we? Just a sunny spot by the river, right?" She pointed at a familiar rock and froze when she saw him holding a small black box. "Zane? Will you marry me again, Cassandra? My love for you never faded, and I want to spend my life with you." Tears welled up as she hesitated. "Are you sure? After everything I've done?" Zane smiled gently. "As long as you're not making those same mistakes? Yes, I'm sure." Cassie quickly grabbed the box, opening it to reveal a beautiful 2-carat diamond ring. She gasped, "It's stunning, but I can only accept if you agree to a prenuptial agreement." Zane frowned, but she explained, "Cal helped me. If I betray you, you get everything: Casey, future kids, the ranch. I walk away with nothing but my clothes." His expression softened. "You did this to give me peace of mind?" She nodded. "I want you to know I'm serious, Zane. If I didn't believe in you, I wouldn't have asked. I'll sign whatever you want. So will you marry me?" Cassie beamed. "Yes, absolutely, yes!" Zane teased her. "You were planning this, weren't you? That prenup was ready because you knew I'd fall for you." Laughing, she admitted, "Maybe I did hope." But before she could say more, he pulled her into a deep kiss. When she started to unfasten her dress, he stopped her with a grin. "Not until we're married." Frustrated but playful, she replied, "Then let's get married soon." 1 week later, Cowboy Bob married them at the Llano River, surrounded by family and close friends. Casey served as maid of honor, sealing the ceremony with a sweet kiss at Bob's request. After a 2-week honeymoon in the Bahamas, they returned home, sun-kissed and happy. 2 months later, they won another world championship in team roping, with Zane also securing his all-around cowboy title. 9 months after, their son Shane Reese was born, followed by twins Sue Ellen and David II. They left the tour, expanded their ranch, and thrived thanks to Zane's oil field investments and Cassie's successful clothing line, Cowgirl Glitter. They built a bigger home overlooking the Llano River. In the end, their love restored what was once broken, proving that even tarnished gold can shine brightly when given a second chance. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.